somewhere in the distant past, something changed, and we no longer remember what. The evidence is subtle, scattered across time. Structures that appear too precise, ideas that seem too advanced, and patterns that repeat as if guided by a shared knowledge now lost. It doesn't feel like coincidence. It feels like fragments of a system we no longer recognize. The more we uncover, the less complete the story becomes, as if we are only seeing what remains after something much larger disappeared. And that leads to a question that is difficult to ignore. Are these remnants simply achievements of ancient civilizations? Or are they the last traces of something we were never meant to forget? Perched on a strategic hill overlooking the plains of western Japan, Himeji Castle stands as one of the most extraordinary fortress complexes ever constructed in the early modern world. Often called the White Heron Castle because of its elegant appearance, the structure seems almost weightless as its bright white walls and layered rooftops rise above massive stone foundations. Yet beneath this graceful silhouette lies a fortress engineered with remarkable sophistication. Built primarily during the early 17th century under the rule of the Tokugawa shogunate, Himeji Castle was not merely a residence for feudal lords, but a carefully designed military stronghold. Its architecture reveals a deep understanding of defensive strategy, structural engineering, and environmental adaptation, many aspects of which still puzzle historians and engineers today. Approaching the castle reveals that its layout is anything but simple. Rather than providing a direct path to the central keep, the fortress forces visitors to navigate a deliberately confusing network of twisting pathways, angled gates, and enclosed courtyards. This layout functions like a carefully designed maze, guiding attackers through a sequence of narrow passages where their formations would be broken apart and their movements slowed. At every turn, defenders positioned in towers and along walls could fire arrows or early firearms downward. The arrangement appears almost like a physical simulation of battlefield movement, raising intriguing questions about how the architects of the early Edo period managed to predict and manipulate the flow of invading troops without the benefit of modern modeling tools or mathematical simulations. The entire fortress behaves like a defensive machine, where architecture itself becomes an active weapon. The massive stone walls supporting the complex are another remarkable feature. These walls are built using enormous blocks of stone, arranged without mortar, forming elegant curves known as fan-shaped slopes. Near the base, the slope is relatively gentle, but as it rises, the angle steepens dramatically and curves inward toward the castle structures above. This subtle geometric design makes climbing extremely difficult, especially during combat. Even more impressive is the durability of these stone foundations. Yet Japan lies in one of the most earthquake-prone regions of the world, yet Himeji Castle has survived centuries of seismic activity, wars, and natural disasters. Engineers studying the structure have noted that the carefully balanced weight distribution and interlocking stonework allow the walls to flex slightly during earthquakes, dissipating energy rather than collapsing. Whether the builders intentionally understood these seismic principles or achieved them through generations of empirical construction knowledge remains a fascinating mystery. The defensive complexity continues throughout the fortress in the form of hundreds of small openings embedded in the walls. These loopholes, known historically as sama, were designed for various weapons, including bows, matchlock guns, and thrown projectiles. They appear in multiple shapes: circular, triangular, rectangular, and are distributed across the castle's walls in patterns that initially seem irregular. However, when researchers analyze the geometry of these placements, they discover that the openings create overlapping fields of fire, capable of covering nearly every approach to the fortress. In effect, defenders could maintain crossfire across key points of the castle's perimeter. Such strategic placement raises questions about whether the designers independently developed principles similar to those later used in European bastion fortifications, or whether these solutions emerged through unique Japanese military experimentation. Inside the towering main keep, the engineering becomes even more impressive. The structure rises several stories high and is built primarily from massive wooden beams interconnected through intricate joinery rather than metal fasteners. Some of the central columns extend vertically through multiple floors, forming a flexible skeleton that can sway gently during earthquakes. This flexibility acts almost like a natural shock absorber, allowing the building to absorb seismic forces rather than resist them rigidly. Modern structural engineers often study traditional Japanese wooden architecture precisely because of its remarkable resilience. Yet the exact calculations or rules of thumb that early craftsmen used to determine the proportions of these beams, the spacing of columns, and the dynamic balance of the entire structure are still not fully documented. Among all these remarkable features, and perhaps the most visually striking and technically mysterious element of Himeji Castle, is its brilliant white exterior coating. The castle's walls are covered with a thick layer of traditional plaster, giving the fortress its iconic luminous appearance and its nickname as the White Heron. At first glance, this coating might seem purely decorative, but it actually performs several crucial functions that have helped preserve the castle for centuries. The plaster acts as a fire-resistant barrier, protecting the wooden structures beneath from flames, an essential feature in a time when many cities were vulnerable to devastating fires. At the same time, the material is highly resistant to rain and humidity, shielding the timber frame from Japan's often harsh climate. The bright surface also reflects sunlight, reducing heat absorption and slowing the weathering of the underlying structure. What makes this plaster especially intriguing is its long-term durability. Despite centuries of exposure to rainstorms, typhoons, seasonal humidity, and temperature fluctuations, large portions of the castle's white exterior have remained intact. Historians believe the plaster mixture included lime, sand, and natural fibers, but the exact proportions and preparation methods used by Edo period craftsmen remain difficult to reconstruct. Traditional builders applied the plaster in multiple layers, allowing each stage to cure before adding the next. This process produced a dense, resilient surface capable of resisting cracking and erosion far better than many modern coatings. Conservation specialists working to restore the castle today often struggle to replicate the exact texture and longevity of the original material, suggesting that the historical techniques involved subtle knowledge that may have been passed down through generations of craftsmen rather than recorded in written manuals. The plaster also contributes to the fortress's defensive role in ways that are less obvious. Its fire-resistant properties would have made it extremely difficult for attackers to burn the castle structures, a common tactic in medieval warfare. At the same time, the smooth white surfaces make it harder to attach climbing equipment or gain traction while scaling the walls. Thus, what appears to be an aesthetic choice may actually represent a sophisticated combination of practical engineering, environmental adaptation, and military design. Standing today, after more than 4 centuries, Himeji Castle remains a masterpiece of architectural ingenuity. Its labyrinthine defensive layout, earthquake-resistant stone foundations, complex wooden framework and remarkably durable white plaster coating together form a fortress that seems both elegant and formidable. For historians and engineers alike, the castle continues to pose intriguing questions. How did builders of the 17th century achieve such precision without modern instruments? How much of their knowledge was based on empirical tradition, and how much represented a deeper understanding of structural principles? And perhaps most fascinating of all, does the enduring brilliance of Himeji's white walls hint at construction techniques that modern science has only begun to rediscover? Even today, the fortress remains not only a symbol of Japan's cultural heritage, but also a reminder that the technological capabilities of the past may have been far more advanced than we often assume. How do you think 17th century architects were able to create such durable and sophisticated construction techniques at Himeji Castle, especially the mysterious white plaster that has survived for centuries? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Carved directly into a sandstone cliff near the ancient northern frontier of China, the monumental sanctuary known as the Yungang Grottoes, often referred to as the Yungang Cliff Temples, stands as one of the most extraordinary achievements of early Buddhist architecture and engineering. Located near the historic city of Taung, this vast complex was created during the rule of the Northern Wei dynasty in the 5th century, a time when Buddhism was rapidly spreading across northern China along the networks of the Silk Road. Today, the site contains more than 50 major caves, over 1,000 smaller niches, and approximately 51,000 statues carved directly into the living rock. Yet beyond the breathtaking religious imagery and monumental scale lies a deeper layer of mystery, one that continues to puzzle archaeologists, engineers, and historians alike. The Yungang Cliff Temples were not built stone by stone, like most ancient monuments. Instead, they were created by removing enormous volumes of sandstone from a cliff face, carefully excavating entire chambers before sculpting gigantic statues from the rock that remained. Some of these caves rise more than 17 meters high, housing Buddha figures that tower over 13 meters in height, their faces serene and perfectly proportioned despite being carved from solid rock within confined cavern spaces. Achieving such precision would have required meticulous planning long before the first chisel ever struck the cliff. Craftsmen had to visualize the final form of each statue in 3 dimensions, and ensuring that every strike of a tool removed only the stone that was meant to disappear while leaving behind the shapes that would ultimately become sacred figures. The logistical challenge alone was staggering. Thousands of workers, artisans, sculptors, and planners would have been required to coordinate excavation, carving, finishing, and painting, transforming what began as a bare cliff into one of the largest Buddhist artistic complexes in the world. In addition to the immense excavation work, the interior spaces of the caves reveal an astonishing level of architectural planning. Columns, vaulted ceilings, and decorative elements were carved directly from the same rock as the surrounding walls, often imitating the structural forms of wooden temples that once stood elsewhere in ancient China. The sculptors reproduced beams, eye brackets, and roof structures in stone, preserving architectural styles that would otherwise have been lost to time. Meanwhile, the statues themselves display a fascinating blend of artistic influences. Early figures show stylistic elements associated with the Gandhara region of ancient India and Central Asia, flowing robes, elongated faces, and classical proportions, while later carvings gradually adopt more distinctly Chinese characteristics. This transformation reflects the cultural exchanges that flowed across Eurasia through the Silk Road, carrying religious ideas, artistic traditions, and technological knowledge across vast distances. The Yungang cliff temples therefore stand not only as a religious monument, but also as a record of cultural convergence, where artistic traditions from distant civilizations were carved into a single cliff face. Yet perhaps the most intriguing aspect of Yungang lies not simply in its scale, but in the subtle physical traces left behind on the stone itself. When researchers examine unfinished surfaces within the caves or hidden sections behind sculptures, they frequently encounter a remarkable pattern: countless parallel tool marks running across the sandstone in extremely consistent lines. These marks appear almost like carefully combed grooves, repeating across wide surfaces with a regularity that is difficult to ignore. The spacing between them is often strikingly uniform, suggesting that the workers followed a highly systematic technique while shaping the rock. What makes these marks particularly mysterious is the level of consistency maintained across large areas of excavation. In many places, the grooves appear so evenly spaced that they almost resemble the mechanical traces of modern cutting tools, yet the craftsmen responsible for them lived more than 1,500 years ago. Archaeological discoveries from the Northern Wei period reveal that metal tools such as iron chisels and hammers were indeed available, but these instruments were relatively simple by modern standards. The question that emerges, therefore, is how such tools could produce surfaces marked with such extraordinary regularity over extended sections of cliff face. Some scholars propose that the artisans used a rhythmic, standardized chisel technique and striking the stone at carefully controlled intervals in order to remove layers gradually while maintaining a predictable pattern. Others speculate that specialized chisels with particular shapes or multiple edges may have been employed, allowing workers to carve consistent grooves with each motion. There is even the possibility that teams of craftsmen worked in coordinated sequences, each repeating identical movements so that the rock was removed in a controlled and uniform manner. Yet despite decades of study, no definitive explanation has been universally accepted. What makes the mystery more compelling is that these marks appear throughout different caves built during different phases of construction, implying that the technique was widely adopted across the entire project rather than being limited to a single group of artisans. Yet even with all that researchers have learned, many questions remain unanswered. How were the immense excavation projects organized with such precision during a time when large-scale engineering documentation was rare? What methods were used to plan the dimensions and proportions of colossal statues before carving began? And most intriguingly, what exact techniques allowed ancient craftsmen to produce the remarkably uniform tool marks that still cover portions of the rock surfaces today? These subtle grooves, often overlooked by casual visitors, may hold important clues to the working methods of the artisans who shaped Yungang more than 15 centuries ago. They serve as quiet signatures of the human hands that transformed an ordinary cliff into a monumental sanctuary of stone. Standing before the vast Buddha figures of Yungang today, it becomes clear that the site is far more than a collection of ancient sculptures. It is a testament to an extraordinary moment in history when faith, art, and engineering converged on a monumental scale, leaving behind a masterpiece that continues to challenge modern understanding. The cliff still bears the silent traces of the tools that carved it, and within those marks lies one of the enduring mysteries of ancient craftsmanship, an unanswered question etched into stone. How do you think ancient craftsmen, more than 1,500 years ago, were able to create such incredibly uniform tool marks on solid rock? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Rising dramatically above the Valley of Lhasa, the monumental silhouette of Potala Palace appears almost unreal, as if carved from the mountain itself, rather than built upon it. Standing atop the rugged slopes of Mapo Ri, or the Red Hill, at an elevation of roughly 3,700 meters above sea level, the palace dominates the skyline of the Tibetan plateau with a scale and presence that few historic structures on Earth can match. With 13 towering levels, more than 1,000 rooms, and walls rising over 100 meters above the rocky hill beneath it, the Potala Palace is not only a sacred symbol of Tibetan Buddhism and the historic seat of the Dalai Lamas, but also one of the most astonishing architectural achievements ever constructed in such a harsh and remote environment. Yet beyond its visual grandeur lies a deeper mystery, an intricate network of engineering techniques and construction strategies that continue to puzzle historians, archaeologists, and structural engineers even today. One of the first enigmas surrounding the palace is its very location. The builders of the 17th century chose to construct this immense complex directly on the steep, uneven rock of Mapo Ri, a site that presents extreme logistical and structural challenges even for modern construction. Rather than leveling the summit or creating large artificial foundations, the architects appear to have integrated the building directly into the mountain itself. In many areas, the natural rock of the hill functions as part of the structural base, with foundations carved into the stone rather than placed upon it. This technique effectively anchors the palace into the bedrock, allowing the massive structure to distribute its enormous weight across the natural contours of the hill. Such integration between architecture and landscape demonstrates an advanced understanding of load distribution and geological stability, yet historical records describing how these calculations were made simply do not exist. The palace stands today as silent evidence of knowledge that may never have been formally documented. Equally remarkable are the palace's colossal stone walls, which in some places reach thicknesses of up to 5 meters near the base. These walls were constructed with a slight inward incline, forming a pyramidal profile that naturally directs the immense weight of the structure downward and inward toward the mountain. This subtle design feature greatly increases structural stability and may help the building resist seismic forces, an important consideration in the Himalayan region, where earthquakes are not uncommon. The masonry itself is composed of carefully arranged stone blocks bonded with a traditional mortar mixture believed to include lime, clay, and organic additives such as milk, sugar, or plant extracts. Some studies suggest that these ingredients may have enhanced the mortar's elasticity and durability, allowing the walls to absorb small movements without cracking. However, the precise composition and preparation methods of this mortar remain only partially understood, leaving modern researchers to speculate about the exact techniques employed by Tibetan builders centuries ago. And yet perhaps the most fascinating and mysterious aspect of the Potala Palace lies hidden within its interior framework, an enormous and highly sophisticated system of wooden structural elements embedded throughout the building. Behind the thick stone walls and beneath the floors of many chambers lies a network of massive timber beams and wooden frameworks that play a crucial role in stabilizing the entire complex. These beams are not merely decorative architectural features. They function as an integrated structural system that helps the palace withstand vibrations, shifting loads, and even seismic shocks. In essence, the builders created a hybrid structure in which rigid stone walls are combined with flexible wooden elements, allowing the palace to absorb energy and movement rather than resisting it entirely. This approach resembles certain principles used in modern earthquake-resistant architecture, where flexibility is intentionally incorporated into a structure to prevent catastrophic failure. What makes this system particularly intriguing is its scale and longevity. Some of the wooden beams inside the Potala Palace measure several meters in length and support enormous stone and brick loads above them. Despite being more than 350 years old, many of these timbers remain structurally sound, showing surprisingly little deterioration. This durability raises important questions about the methods used to prepare and preserve the wood. It is possible that the builders employed traditional Tibetan techniques involving natural oils, resins, or mineral treatments that protected the wood from insects, rot, and environmental degradation. However, because the palace has undergone numerous restorations over the centuries, identifying the original treatment methods has proven difficult. Researchers who have examined surviving timbers often note the exceptional density and stability of the wood, suggesting careful selection of slow-growing, high-altitude trees, combined with specialized curing processes that may have taken months or even years before the beams were installed. Another remarkable aspect of the wooden structural system is the way it interacts with the stone architecture surrounding it. Instead of being rigidly fixed in place, many wooden components appear to have been designed with slight tolerances that allow subtle movement. When external forces such as wind, temperature changes, or minor seismic activity affect the building, the wooden elements can flex slightly, redistributing stress throughout the structure. This flexibility acts almost like a natural shock absorber, preventing cracks from spreading through the heavy stone walls. In modern engineering terms, the palace effectively combines rigid load-bearing masonry with a hidden internal damping system, an idea that would not become common in earthquake engineering until centuries later. Whether the Tibetan builders fully understood the physics behind this phenomenon or arrived at the design through generations of empirical knowledge remains an open question. The mystery deepens further when considering the logistical challenges involved in constructing such a system. Transporting enormous timber beams to the summit of Mapo Ri in the 17th century would have required tremendous effort. The Tibetan plateau lacks large forests near Lhasa, meaning that suitable trees likely had to be transported from distant valleys or mountain regions. Without modern machinery, these heavy beams were probably hauled by teams of workers and animals using sledges, ropes, and wooden rollers along steep mountain paths. The scale of coordination required for such operations hints at an organized construction effort involving thousands of laborers, craftsmen, and monks working together over many years. Beyond structural stability, the wooden framework may also contribute to another remarkable characteristic of the palace: its ability to maintain relatively stable internal conditions despite the extreme climate of the Tibetan Plateau. At nearly 4,000 meters above sea level, and temperatures in Lhasa can fluctuate dramatically between day and night, and strong winds regularly sweep across the valley. Yet many interior spaces within the palace remain surprisingly comfortable, protected by thick insulating walls and the thermal properties of timber and stone working together. The wooden beams help regulate humidity and temperature changes, preventing the interior environment from becoming too cold or brittle during harsh winters. This subtle interaction between materials demonstrates an architectural sensitivity to environmental conditions that is rarely discussed, but likely played a vital role in preserving the palace for centuries. Today, the Potala Palace stands not only as a cultural and spiritual symbol but also as a remarkable example of Himalayan engineering. Built from stone, earth, wood, and the natural mountain itself, the structure has remained stable for centuries. Although historians understand some of the techniques used in its construction, much of the deeper knowledge behind these methods was never recorded. As a result, the palace remains both a masterpiece of architecture and a lasting mystery of ancient engineering, showing that long before modern technology, human ingenuity had already developed sophisticated ways to build structures capable of enduring time and nature. How do you think the builders of Potala Palace managed to create a structure that could stand stable for centuries on top of such a high mountain? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Perched dramatically on the sheer face of a mountain in northeastern Turkey, Sumela Monastery stands as one of the most astonishing architectural achievements of the ancient Byzantine world. Suspended high above a forested valley within the rugged landscape of the Pontic Mountains, the monastery clings to a near-vertical cliff, approximately 300 meters above the ground below. At first glance, the location alone raises a fundamental question that continues to intrigue historians, archaeologists, and engineers alike. How did builders over 15 centuries ago manage to construct such a complex structure in a place that even modern engineers would consider extremely difficult to access? The origins of the monastery are traditionally traced back to the 4th century CE, when, according to legend, two Greek monks named Barnabas and Sophronios discovered a sacred icon of the Virgin Mary hidden within a cave on the mountainside. Over time, what may have begun as a modest hermitage gradually expanded into a sprawling monastic complex carved into the rock itself, consisting of chapels, living quarters, kitchens, storage rooms, stairways, and terraces interconnected along the cliff face. Yet the deeper researchers study the site, the more mysterious the technological and logistical aspects of its construction appear. One of the most perplexing questions concerns the sheer difficulty of building on such an unforgiving landscape. The cliff on which Sumela Monastery stands is steep, irregular, and largely devoid of natural platforms suitable for construction. In many places, the rock face rises almost vertically, meaning that ancient builders had to create their own structural bases by cutting directly into the mountain. Evidence suggests that significant portions of the monastery were excavated from the rock before masonry structures were added to extend outward from the cliff. This hybrid approach, part cave architecture and part built structure, required a deep understanding of the mountain's geology. Workers had to determine where the rock was stable enough to support chambers, corridors, and external walls without causing dangerous fractures or collapses. The tools available during the early Byzantine period were relatively simple compared to modern drilling equipment, yet the surfaces inside some excavated chambers show surprisingly consistent cutting patterns, implying that the builders possessed highly refined techniques for working stone in confined and precarious conditions. The challenge of transporting construction materials presents another unsolved puzzle. Massive quantities of stone blocks, timber beams, plaster, pigments, and everyday supplies had to be brought to a site hundreds of meters above the valley floor. Scholars have proposed that ropes, wooden scaffolding, and pulley systems may have been used from the cliff top above the monastery, but no definitive archaeological evidence of such systems has been found. Even today, with modern cranes and helicopters, building at such a location would be logistically complex. The fact that the monastery not only exists, but survived centuries of storms, landslides, and seismic activity suggests that its designers carefully balanced the structure's weight against the natural contours of the rock face. Equally remarkable is the monastery's sophisticated management of water in an environment where reliable access to fresh water would have been essential for survival. Channels carved directly into the rock appear to have guided water from springs higher up the mountain toward reservoirs and storage areas within the complex. Designing such a system required precise control of gradient to ensure that water flowed steadily without eroding the channels or overflowing the reservoirs. In effect, the builders transformed the mountain itself into a natural hydraulic system that could sustain the monastic community even in periods of isolation. Yet among all the engineering puzzles surrounding Sumela Monastery, perhaps the most extraordinary and enduring mystery lies within its interior walls. The breathtaking frescoes that have survived for centuries in one of the most challenging environments imaginable. These wall paintings, created during different phases of the monastery's history, cover the surfaces of chapels and corridors with vivid scenes drawn from Christian theology, including depictions of Christ, the Virgin Mary, angels, saints, and narratives from the New Testament. The artistic style reflects the traditions of Byzantine religious painting, characterized by elongated figures, expressive gestures, and vibrant symbolic colors intended to communicate spiritual meaning rather than strict realism. However, what truly astonishes researchers is not merely the artistic quality of the frescoes, but their extraordinary durability. Despite exposure to humidity, temperature fluctuations, and centuries of human activity, many of these paintings remain remarkably visible today. This resilience raises fascinating questions about the materials and techniques used by the artists who created them. Fresco painting traditionally involves applying pigments to freshly laid wet plaster so that the colors become chemically bonded with the wall surface as the plaster dries. Yet the precise composition of the plaster and pigments used at Sumela appears to have been particularly effective in preserving the artwork under harsh conditions. Yes, mineral pigments derived from natural earths and stones were likely combined with carefully prepared lime plasters that hardened over time into a durable surface. Some scholars believe that the specific geological composition of the mountain itself may have influenced the chemistry of the plaster, helping it resist moisture penetration and slowing the deterioration of the pigments. Others suggest that the builders may have used layered plaster techniques that created microbarriers against water infiltration. The mountain's overhanging rock also plays a role, shielding parts of the monastery from direct rainfall and intense sunlight. Even so, the survival of these frescoes for more than a millennium is nothing short of extraordinary. In many locations around the world, wall paintings exposed to far milder environments have deteriorated far more quickly. The continued presence of Sumela's frescoes therefore represents not only an artistic treasure, but also a technological mystery, revealing a level of practical knowledge about materials that researchers are still trying to fully understand. The monastery continued to expand during the Byzantine and later Ottoman periods, gradually evolving into the multi-layered structure visible today. New rooms and chapels were added along the cliff face, often integrating seamlessly with older sections carved into the mountain. This gradual expansion suggests that successive generations of builders carefully studied the existing architecture before adding new elements, ensuring that the entire complex remained structurally stable. By the 19th century, New Sumela Monastery had become an important religious and cultural center in the region, attracting pilgrims and scholars alike. Yet even as political circumstances changed and the monastery was eventually abandoned in the 20th century, the building itself remained remarkably intact. Today, restored and protected as a historic site, it continues to inspire awe among visitors, who gaze up at the improbable sight of a monastery clinging to a towering cliff. Ultimately, Sumela Monastery represents far more than a place of worship. It is a testament to the ingenuity, determination, and technical skill of its builders, who transformed a nearly inaccessible mountain wall into a functioning spiritual community. In the mysteries surrounding its construction, from the logistics of transporting materials to the geological precision of its carved chambers, continue to challenge modern understanding. Yet perhaps the most evocative symbol of this achievement remains the centuries-old frescoes glowing faintly within its chapels, silent witnesses to generations of monks who once lived, prayed, and painted high above the valley floor, leaving behind a legacy that still defies time, weather, and explanation. What do you think is the secret that allowed the frescoes inside Sumela Monastery to survive for more than 1,000 years in such a harsh mountain environment? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. Rising dramatically above the dense forests and plains of central Sri Lanka, Sigiriya Rock Fortress stands as one of the most extraordinary architectural and artistic achievements of the ancient world. The immense column of reddish stone, nearly 200 meters high, dominates the surrounding landscape like a natural citadel carved by geological forces and later transformed by human ambition into a royal palace in the sky. Built during the 5th century under the rule of Kashyapa I, Sigiriya represents a remarkable fusion of engineering, urban planning, hydraulic technology, and artistic expression. What makes the site so fascinating is not only its breathtaking setting, but also the many technical mysteries that continue to puzzle historians, archaeologists, and engineers. From the moment one approaches the fortress, it becomes clear that Sigiriya was never meant to be an ordinary settlement. The builders selected a nearly vertical rock formation and somehow converted it into a sophisticated royal residence, complete with gardens, reservoirs, stairways, defensive walls, and a palace complex at the summit. Every brick, every slab of stone, and every container of water had to be transported upward along narrow staircases carved into the rock face, raising questions about the logistical capabilities of ancient builders more than 15 centuries ago. Even with modern machinery, constructing a palace on top of such a massive monolith would be a formidable challenge. Yet the architects of Sigiriya not only achieved this feat, but integrated the entire fortress into a carefully planned landscape that stretched across the surrounding plains. Up at the base of the rock lies one of the most advanced garden complexes of the ancient world, a vast arrangement of symmetrical water gardens, canals, terraces, and stone pathways that demonstrate a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of hydraulic engineering. The gardens are organized along a precise geometric axis, creating a sense of balance and order that contrasts with the rugged natural environment surrounding the rock. Pools of clear water reflect the sky, while underground channels guide water through hidden pipes beneath the surface. Some of the fountains in these gardens continue to function during the rainy season, even today, sending delicate streams of water into the air, just as they did more than 1,500 years ago. This remarkable phenomenon suggests that the engineers who designed the system understood how to manipulate gravity and water pressure with remarkable accuracy. By carefully calculating slopes and controlling the flow of water through subterranean conduits, they created a self-sustaining hydraulic system that required no mechanical pumps. Such knowledge of water management is rarely associated with early medieval architecture, and yet the evidence at Sigiriya clearly demonstrates that its designers possessed an advanced grasp of hydraulic principles. As visitors ascend the rock, through a series of staircases and terraces, they encounter another enigmatic feature known as the Mirror Wall. This long and curving wall runs along the side of the cliff and was once coated with a highly polished plaster surface so smooth that it reflected light like a mirror. Ancient accounts describe how the king could see his own reflection in the wall as he walked along the pathway. Even today, traces of the glossy surface remain visible, despite centuries of exposure to wind and rain. Scientific analysis has revealed that the plaster mixture contained lime, combined with finely ground minerals and possibly organic additives that helped produce an exceptionally smooth finish. However, the precise formula and polishing technique used to create such a reflective surface over a large stone wall remain uncertain. Over time, the mirror wall became a canvas for visitors who left poems and inscriptions praising the beauty of Sigiriya. These ancient writings, by dating from the 8th to the 10th centuries, provide rare insight into how travelers of the past experienced the site, often describing the paintings and architecture with admiration and wonder. Yet the most captivating and mysterious element of Sigiriya lies higher on the rock face in a series of sheltered alcoves that contain some of the most remarkable fresco paintings ever created in the ancient world. These frescoes, believed to have been painted during the reign of King Kashapa in the 5th century, depict graceful female figures emerging from clouds, adorned with elaborate jewelry and vibrant garments. Their expressions are serene, their gestures delicate, and their forms rendered with remarkable elegance. The women appear almost ethereal, floating against a backdrop of warm-toned rock and swirling clouds, and as though suspended between the earthly world and the heavens. What astonishes scholars and visitors alike is the extraordinary preservation of these paintings. Despite surviving in a tropical climate characterized by intense heat, humidity, monsoon rains, and centuries of natural erosion, the colors remain vivid and luminous. Rich shades of red, gold, green, and subtle flesh tones still retain their brilliance more than 1,500 years after they were first applied to the rock surface. The durability of these pigments raises profound questions about the materials and techniques used by the ancient artists. Analysis suggests that the colors were derived from natural mineral pigments such as iron oxides and other earth compounds. But the exact binding agents that allowed these pigments to adhere so firmly to the plaster surface remain uncertain. The artists appear to have prepared the rock face with a carefully layered plaster base before applying the pigments using techniques that may resemble both true fresco and fresco secco methods. However, the exceptional longevity of the paintings suggests that the craftsmen possessed a level of knowledge about mineral pigments, plaster preparation, and environmental protection that remains difficult to fully replicate today. Originally, it is believed that hundreds of such frescoes covered a large section of the western rock face, forming an immense gallery of celestial figures visible from afar. Today, only a few dozen survive, yet even this small fraction reveals an astonishing level of artistic sophistication. The painters demonstrated a mastery of shading, contour, and color blending that creates the illusion of depth and softness in the figures. Their fluid brushwork and refined sense of proportion suggest that they were highly trained artists working under royal patronage, perhaps part of an organized court workshop dedicated to decorating the king's palace. Some scholars believe the women depicted in the frescoes represent celestial nymphs or divine beings associated with fertility and prosperity, while others suggest they may portray royal attendants or members of the king's court. Whatever their true meaning, the frescoes remain one of the greatest artistic treasures of ancient Sri Lanka and one of the most enduring mysteries of the fortress. The fact that these paintings have survived for more than a millennium in such harsh environmental conditions challenges modern assumptions about the technological capabilities of early medieval civilizations. Near the summit of Sigiriya stands another dramatic feature known as the Lion Gate, which once served as the final entrance to the royal palace. Today, only the massive stone paws of the lion remain, but archaeological evidence indicates that the staircase originally passed through the open mouth of a gigantic lion-shaped structure constructed from brick and plaster. Visitors climbing toward the summit would have entered the palace by walking directly through the lion's mouth, symbolically passing into the domain of royal authority. The sheer scale of this structure suggests that it must have been an awe-inspiring sight in its original form. Constructing such a massive sculpture directly onto the steep rock face would have required careful planning, stable foundations, and strong binding materials capable of securing the structure to the stone surface. Today, Sigiriya Rock Fortress is recognized as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO and remains one of the most famous archaeological landmarks of ancient Sri Lanka. Yet even after more than a century of research, many of the fortress's mysteries remain unsolved. Scientists still do not fully understand how building materials were transported to the top of the massive rock, how the hydraulic systems of the water gardens operated with such precision, nor what exact formula created the reflective surface of the famous mirror wall. Even more puzzling is the technique that allowed the fresco paintings to preserve their vivid colors for more than 1,000 years in a harsh, tropical climate. For this reason, Sigiriya is not only a remarkable monument of the past, but also a reminder that the technological and artistic knowledge of ancient civilizations may have been far more advanced than we often assume. Where are you watching this video from, and what time of day is it for you? Share your location and time in the comments below. Perched high above the western shore of the Dead Sea, the ancient stronghold known as Masada rises from the harsh desert landscape of Judea like a monument to both human determination and engineering ingenuity. This isolated plateau, towering hundreds of meters above the surrounding terrain, appears at first glance to be an almost impossible place for a large settlement, let alone a fortified palace complex. Yet during the 1st century BCE, the ambitious ruler Herod the Great transformed this natural fortress into one of the most formidable strongholds of the ancient world. Massive walls, palaces, storage complexes, and defensive structures were constructed atop the steep cliffs, turning Masada into a strategic refuge capable of sustaining a community for extended periods. Today, the ruins stand as one of the most iconic archaeological sites in the Middle East, not only because of their dramatic history during the First Jewish-Roman War, but also because of the remarkable technical achievements required to build and maintain such a complex in one of the most unforgiving environments imaginable. The very location of Masada presents the first great mystery. Rising roughly 450 meters above the Dead Sea and surrounded by sheer cliffs on most sides, the plateau seems almost inaccessible. Even today, reaching the summit requires a long, winding ascent along narrow paths carved into the mountainside. In antiquity, however, builders somehow transported enormous quantities of stone, timber, food supplies, and construction materials to the top of this isolated mountain. Archaeological evidence shows that the fortress contained not only defensive walls and towers, but also luxurious palace structures, bathhouses inspired by Roman design, administrative buildings, and vast storerooms. The logistical challenge alone would have been immense. Scholars have proposed that temporary ramps, or large labor forces using sledges and pack animals, may have been employed, yet the precise organization of such a massive construction effort remains unclear. Without cranes, modern surveying tools, or advanced lifting machinery, the engineers of Herod's kingdom somehow succeeded in building an architectural complex that has survived for more than 2,000 years. Among all the technological achievements of Masada, however, none is more astonishing or more mysterious than its water management system. The fortress stands in the Judean desert, a region where rainfall is rare and unpredictable, and where natural springs are virtually non-existent. Under such conditions, sustaining even a small group of people would be difficult. Yet Masada was designed to support hundreds of inhabitants during prolonged sieges. The key to this survival lay in a remarkably sophisticated system of water collection, transport, and storage that continues to puzzle researchers today. Surrounding the plateau are deep desert wadis, dry valleys that occasionally carry torrents of rainwater during seasonal storms. The engineers responsible for Masada recognized the potential of these brief but powerful floods and devised a network of channels to capture them. Now, carefully carved conduits guided runoff water from the surrounding cliffs into a series of enormous cisterns cut directly into the rock along the mountain slopes. These reservoirs were astonishing in scale. Some were large enough to store tens of thousands of cubic meters of water, providing a reserve capable of sustaining the fortress population for long periods. What makes this system particularly remarkable is the level of precision involved in its design. The channels that directed rainwater toward the reservoirs had to be constructed with carefully calculated gradients so that water would flow efficiently without eroding the channels themselves or bypassing the collection points. Too steep a slope would cause destructive torrents, while too shallow a slope would prevent water from reaching the cisterns at all. Yet the engineers of Masada appear to have achieved this balance with impressive accuracy, despite lacking the surveying instruments used in modern hydraulic engineering. Even more astonishing is the way the reservoirs were integrated into the landscape. Many were carved into the rock faces of the mountain itself, accessible through stairways that allowed workers to draw water and transport it up to the fortress plateau above. The sheer scale of these cisterns indicates that their builders anticipated long periods of isolation and planned accordingly. Archaeologists have suggested that the total storage capacity of the Masada water system may have exceeded what was strictly necessary, implying that the fortress was intended not merely as a temporary refuge, but as a long-term strategic stronghold. The mystery deepens when researchers consider how the ancient engineers surveyed the terrain in the first place, mapping the complex drainage patterns of desert valleys and predicting the direction of seasonal floodwaters would have required a sophisticated understanding of the landscape. Without aerial views, satellite imagery, or modern hydrological modeling, the builders relied solely on observation and experience. Yet the resulting system demonstrates a level of environmental awareness that rivals many later engineering projects. Some scholars believe that generations of local knowledge about desert floods may have guided the design, while others suggest that trial and error over many years gradually refined the system. Whatever the explanation, as the final result represents one of the most advanced water management systems of the ancient Near East. The architectural achievements of Masada extend beyond water engineering. On the northern edge of the plateau, Herod ordered the construction of a spectacular three-tiered palace built directly into the cliff face. This palace complex featured terraces connected by staircases, decorative halls, and panoramic views of the desert below. Constructing such a structure on a steep rock slope required careful balancing of weight and structural support. Yet the remains of the palace still cling to the cliff after more than 2 millennia. The fortress was also surrounded by a defensive wall stretching roughly 1,300 meters around the plateau, punctuated by towers that once allowed guards to monitor the surrounding desert. Within these walls were large storerooms, filled with supplies, carefully designed to preserve grain, oil, wine, and other provisions in the dry desert climate. Remarkably, archaeological excavations have uncovered traces of food that survived for centuries due to the exceptional preservation conditions created by the fortress's storage architecture. Masada's story reached its dramatic climax during the final stages of the First Jewish-Roman War in the 1st century CE. As Roman forces advanced through Judea, a group of Jewish rebels retreated to the fortress, using its formidable defenses and abundant supplies to withstand a prolonged siege. Determined to capture the stronghold, the Roman army constructed a massive earthen ramp against the western side of the plateau, allowing siege engines to be brought within range of the walls. The remains of this ramp are still visible today, forming one of the most impressive surviving examples of Roman military engineering. Yet even this monumental structure serves to highlight the genius of the fortress itself. The fact that the Romans had to build such a colossal ramp in order to reach the defenders demonstrates just how effectively Masada's natural geography and engineered infrastructure worked together. Today, Masada stands not only as a symbol of resistance and tragedy, but also as a testament to ancient engineering skill. Its builders transformed an isolated desert plateau into a self-sustaining fortress capable of supporting life in one of the harshest climates on Earth. The most remarkable achievement remains its water collection and storage system, whose scale and efficiency reveal a surprisingly advanced understanding of environmental engineering. More than 2,000 years later, this achievement continues to challenge modern assumptions about the technological capabilities of ancient civilizations. How do you think the ancient engineers at Masada were able to design and build such a sophisticated water collection and storage system in the middle of a harsh desert more than 2,000 years ago? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. Rising above the historic town of Shravanabelagola, the ancient complex known as the Chandragiri Hill Jain Temples stands quietly on the summit of a massive granite hill. Yet beneath this calm appearance lies a site filled with archaeological puzzles and technological questions that continue to intrigue historians and engineers alike. The hill has been an important spiritual center of Jainism for more than 2 millennia, and today more than a dozen small temples, memorial shrines, and inscriptions remain scattered across its rocky surface. Many of these structures were constructed between the 3rd century BCE and the 12th century CE, during different dynasties of southern India, gradually transforming the barren hilltop into a sacred architectural landscape. What makes the site particularly fascinating, however, is not only its religious history, but also the extraordinary technical achievement required to build stone temples on such a difficult terrain. Chandragiri Hill is essentially a giant exposed granite formation, rising high above the surrounding plains, with very little natural soil or building material available at the summit. Yet ancient builders managed to construct temples, platforms, and memorial monuments directly on the rock surface, carefully adapting their structures to the uneven contours of the hill. Archaeologists still debate how heavy granite blocks were transported to the top in ancient times, because the steep slopes and slippery rock would have made large-scale construction extremely difficult without advanced lifting systems. Some researchers suggest that certain stones may have been quarried directly from the hill itself, while others believe that at least part of the material had to be carried upward from lower elevations, using labor-intensive methods that have left little archaeological trace. Beyond the logistical challenge of construction, the temples themselves reveal a remarkable level of stoneworking skill that raises even deeper questions about ancient craftsmanship. The granite used at Chandragiri is one of the hardest types of stone available in the region, and shaping it with simple iron tools would normally require enormous effort and time. Yet when examining the temples closely, one immediately notices an extraordinary precision in the way many of the stones were cut and fitted together. Walls and pillars in several basadi structures show flat surfaces that appear unusually smooth for hand-worked granite, and while the edges of many blocks meet with such accuracy that the joints are barely visible. In certain sections, the stones fit together so tightly that even a thin blade cannot easily slide between them, a characteristic that immediately invites comparison with other famous examples of high-precision ancient masonry around the world, such as the polygonal stonework of Machu Picchu or the enigmatic stone engineering seen at Pumapunku. Although the Chandragiri temples are architecturally simpler than those monumental sites, the underlying craftsmanship demonstrates a similar mastery of stone shaping that remains difficult to fully explain, using only the tools known from the period. Several stones display long, straight-cut marks that run parallel across their surfaces, suggesting that the ancient builders followed a systematic technique for leveling and smoothing the granite. The precision of these marks has led some observers to question whether the craftsmen employed specialized stone-cutting methods that are not fully understood today, perhaps involving repeated abrasion, controlled chiseling patterns, or other processes that allowed them to achieve a surprisingly even finish on extremely hard rock. Even more intriguing is the consistency with which these stones were shaped. Many temple walls appear carefully aligned, forming right angles and flat planes that indicate deliberate measurement and planning. Achieving such accuracy on irregular granite surfaces would have required not only skilled labor, but also reliable techniques for measurement, alignment, and leveling. Yet archaeologists have found no surviving instruments or detailed records explaining how these ancient builders measured distances or angles during construction. The result is a quiet but persistent mystery, a group of small hilltop temples that appear deceptively simple yet embody an impressive level of technical competence. The precision of the granite work becomes even more striking when considered alongside the numerous stone memorials known as nishidi that stand across the hilltop. These monuments commemorate Jain ascetics who undertook the ritual of Salakana, a spiritual practice involving voluntary fasting at the end of life. Each memorial is carved from granite and inscribed with delicate lines of text, some of which date back more than 1,000 years. Despite centuries of exposure to sun, wind, and monsoon rains, many of the inscriptions remain remarkably clear, with fine characters deeply cut into the stone surface. Carving such detailed lettering into granite would have required extreme control over chiseling techniques, suggesting that the artisans who worked on Chandragiri possessed not only patience, but also an advanced understanding of how to shape and polish hard stone without causing cracks or fractures. The layout of the temples across the summit further adds to the impression that the builders possessed a sophisticated sense of planning. Although the structures were built during different historical periods, they appear to follow a coherent spatial arrangement that takes advantage of the natural rock formations. Pathways weave naturally between temples, and several shrines face similar directions, hinting that the placement of buildings may have followed symbolic or practical considerations related to ritual movement or sunlight orientation. The site is also linked to one of the most famous figures in early Indian history, Chandragupta Maurya, the founder of the powerful Maurya Empire. According to Jain tradition, Chandragupta renounced his throne and spent the final years of his life on Chandragiri Hill as a Jain monk, ultimately performing Salakana there. While inscriptions and later texts support the cultural memory of this story, historians still debate whether the archaeological evidence directly confirms his presence on the hill. Some inscriptions associated with the legend were created centuries after his lifetime, leaving scholars uncertain about how much of the narrative reflects historical events and how much may have evolved through religious tradition. Regardless of the precise historical details, Chandragiri Hill remains one of the most important Jain pilgrimage sites in India, attracting visitors who climb the stone steps leading to its summit each year. From a technological perspective, however, the site offers something equally compelling: a quiet demonstration of ancient engineering abilities that appear far more sophisticated than the modest scale of the temples might suggest. The ability to quarry, shape, transport, and assemble granite with such accuracy on a barren hilltop suggests that the craftsmen responsible for these temples possessed practical knowledge and construction techniques that are still not entirely understood today. Even after centuries of archaeological study, the precise methods used to cut the granite so evenly, align the stones so accurately, and construct durable temples on such a difficult landscape remain only partially explained. In this sense, the Chandragiri Hill Jain temples stand not only as sacred monuments of devotion, but also as subtle reminders that ancient builders often achieved levels of technical precision that continue to challenge modern assumptions about early engineering. How do you think ancient builders were able to cut and fit extremely hard granite blocks with such remarkable precision on the summit of Chandragiri Hill thousands of years ago? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. Perched dramatically on a sheer cliff nearly 900 meters above the Paro Valley, the legendary Paro Taksang, widely known as the Tiger's Nest Monastery, stands as one of the most breathtaking and enigmatic architectural achievements in the Himalayan world. Suspended against a vertical wall of granite at an altitude of more than 3,000 meters above sea level, the monastery appears almost unreal, as if it were placed there by forces beyond ordinary human capability. From a distance, the complex seems to grow directly out of the mountain itself, its whitewashed walls and golden roofs clinging to the cliff face with astonishing precision. While the site is revered as one of the holiest places in Bhutanese Buddhism, it also presents a series of engineering puzzles that continue to fascinate historians, architects, and scientists. The question that repeatedly arises is simple yet profound. How was such a structure built in a location that even today is extraordinarily difficult to access, and what construction techniques allowed it to remain stable on such an unforgiving landscape for centuries? The origins of the site are closely connected to the Buddhist master Padmasambhava, who, according to Bhutanese tradition, arrived at this cliff in the 8th century and meditated in a cave within the rock face. Legend describes him flying to the site on the back of a tigress, an image that later gave the monastery its famous name, Tiger's Nest. For centuries, the cave remained a sacred pilgrimage destination. But the monastery complex that now surrounds it was formally constructed in 1692 under the direction of the Bhutanese religious leader Tenzin Rabgye. Even within the historical record of Bhutan, however, the details of the construction process remain remarkably scarce. There are no surviving architectural plans, no detailed written accounts describing the building stages, and almost no physical evidence of the large-scale infrastructure that must have been required to assemble such a complex in this extreme environment. As a result, the monastery exists today not only as a sacred monument, but also as a fascinating technical mystery. One of the most obvious challenges lies in the location itself. The cliff on which Paro Taksang stands is nearly vertical, rising sharply above dense forest and deep valleys carved by Himalayan rivers. Even today, visitors must travel along a steep mountain trail for hours to reach the monastery, and large equipment cannot easily be transported to the site. Yet the original builders somehow managed to carry enormous quantities of timber, stone, roofing materials, clay plaster, statues, and ceremonial objects to this impossible height. The logistics alone would have required extraordinary coordination and physical endurance. Scholars have suggested that ropes, wooden scaffolding, and pulley systems may have been used, perhaps anchored to higher points along the cliff face. Others believe temporary pathways or carved ledges may once have existed along the rock. However, almost no physical remains of such construction systems have survived, leaving researchers to reconstruct the process largely through speculation. The difficulty of transporting materials up such a dangerous cliff raises an even more intriguing question. Once the materials arrived, how were they actually secured to the mountain? This question leads directly to one of the most mysterious technical aspects of the entire complex: the hidden system of foundations and structural anchors that hold the monastery against the rock face. Unlike many buildings constructed on mountain slopes, Paro Taksang does not simply rest on a stable plateau or wide terrace. Instead, large portions of the structure appear to be suspended directly above steep drops, supported by narrow ledges, protruding rock shelves, or cavities carved into the granite. And in some places, the monastery walls rise directly from the cliff, as though the stone itself had been shaped to receive them. The visible architecture suggests that the builders integrated the monastery deeply into the natural geometry of the rock, carefully adapting each building to the irregular contours of the cliff. Yet the true engineering behind this integration remains difficult to observe because much of the structural support is hidden within the rock itself. Researchers believe that ancient builders may have drilled deep holes into the granite and inserted massive wooden beams that functioned as anchors, effectively tying the monastery to the mountain. These beams would then support floors, balconies, and external galleries projecting outward from the cliff. Such techniques were not entirely unknown in Himalayan architecture, but the scale and precision required at Tiger's Nest appear far more advanced than typical examples. What makes the mystery even deeper is the relative absence of visible drilling marks on many sections of the rock. If large anchoring beams were inserted into the cliff, the holes used to place them should still be identifiable in at least some areas. Yet many surveys of the site have revealed surprisingly few traces of large-scale drilling or chiseling. This absence of clear evidence has led some researchers to suggest that the builders may have used natural fissures and cavities within the rock itself, carefully inserting structural elements into existing weaknesses in the stone, rather than carving new ones. If this hypothesis is correct, it would imply an extraordinary understanding of the geological structure of the cliff, whereas the builders would have needed to identify stable fracture lines capable of supporting heavy loads. Another possibility involves the strategic use of stone platforms built directly onto the rock ledges, distributing weight across multiple contact points rather than relying on a single foundation. By spreading structural loads across several smaller surfaces, the monastery could remain stable even on narrow projections of stone. Modern structural engineers who have examined similar techniques Note that such load distribution can significantly reduce the stress placed on any single point of support. However, applying this principle on a nearly vertical cliff with limited access would have required exceptional planning and craftsmanship. Every beam, wall, truss and support would need to be precisely aligned with the irregular surfaces of the mountain, ensuring that the building remained balanced despite strong winds, seismic activity, and centuries of erosion. The materials used in the construction of Paro Taktsang also reflect a remarkable adaptation to the harsh Himalayan climate. The monastery combines timber frames with stone foundations and thick layers of clay-based plaster, forming a structure that can expand and contract with temperature fluctuations while maintaining structural stability. Wooden beams allow for slight flexibility during earthquakes, a crucial feature in a seismically active region such as the Himalayas. At the same time, the stone components anchor the buildings firmly to the cliff. Yes, this combination of rigidity and flexibility may explain how the monastery has survived numerous environmental stresses over the centuries. The region regularly experiences powerful mountain winds, dramatic shifts in temperature between day and night, and seasonal monsoon rains that can destabilize weaker structures. Yet Tiger's Nest continues to stand, its buildings balanced between gravity and stone, in a way that appears almost miraculous. Historical records indicate that the monastery has endured fires and natural disasters, including a major blaze in 1998 that destroyed several parts of the complex. Despite the damage, the fundamental structural system anchored to the cliff remained intact, allowing reconstruction efforts to rebuild the damaged sections using traditional Bhutanese architectural techniques. This resilience further highlights the effectiveness of the original engineering principles, even if those principles are not yet fully understood. For modern engineers, the monastery represents a fascinating example of how traditional construction knowledge can achieve stability in environments that would challenge even contemporary building technology. Ultimately, the mystery of Paro Taktsang lies not only in its dramatic location, but in the hidden engineering knowledge within its structure. Ancient builders managed to anchor an entire monastery to a vertical cliff without modern surveying tools, cranes, or reinforced concrete. Even today, as visitors stand on the narrow balconies overlooking the Paro Valley, one question remains: how did the original builders create a foundation system strong enough to grip the living rock itself? Until clearer archaeological evidence is discovered, Tiger's Nest will continue to stand as both a sacred sanctuary and a remarkable monument to ancient engineering whose secrets remain only partly understood. How do you think ancient builders managed to anchor an entire monastery to a nearly vertical cliff like this? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. Rising dramatically above the plains of Thessaly in central Greece, the Meteora Monasteries appear almost unreal, as if fragments of architecture had been placed on the tops of stone towers by some unseen hand. The name Meteora itself means suspended in the air, and few places on Earth embody that description more literally. These monasteries sit atop towering sandstone pillars that rise hundreds of meters above the valley floor, their sheer vertical walls making them seem almost completely inaccessible. From a distance, the structures appear fragile and improbable, clinging to the narrow summits of massive rock columns that were shaped by millions of years of geological processes. Yet these buildings were constructed centuries ago by Orthodox monks using only the tools and techniques available in the medieval world. Today, Meteora is recognized as one of the most extraordinary cultural landscapes in Europe, But beyond its spiritual significance lies a deeper layer of mystery. Questions about engineering, logistics, and human ingenuity that continue to puzzle historians, archaeologists, and engineers alike. The sandstone pillars themselves were formed roughly 60 million years ago, when the region was part of an ancient seabed. Over vast stretches of geological time, tectonic uplift and erosion sculpted the sedimentary deposits into isolated rock towers that resemble gigantic natural columns rising from the earth. These formations can reach heights of 400 to 600 meters, with surfaces so steep and smooth that climbing them without modern equipment would be extraordinarily difficult. And yet, beginning around the 11th and 12th centuries, hermit monks seeking solitude and spiritual isolation began settling in caves carved into the sides of these cliffs. By the 14th century, these solitary retreats gradually evolved into full monastic communities, and the construction of large monasteries began on the very summits of the rock pillars. Eventually, more than 20 monasteries were established across the Meteora formations, each perched on a seemingly impossible peak. Today, 6 remain active, continuing a tradition that has endured for centuries. What makes Meteora particularly astonishing is not simply the presence of buildings on high cliffs, but the scale and complexity of the structures themselves. These are not small huts or temporary shelters, but fully developed monastic complexes containing chapels, living quarters, kitchens, storerooms, libraries, and defensive walls. Many of the buildings were constructed using stone masonry and timber frameworks that required enormous quantities of materials. The logistics of transporting those materials to the tops of the pillars is one of the most intriguing mysteries associated with Meteora. Even in modern times, moving heavy construction materials to such heights would require cranes, helicopters, or sophisticated climbing systems. Yet the medieval builders of Meteora had none of these technologies. The rock pillars had no roads, no natural slopes, and often only small, uneven surfaces at their summits. Simply reaching the top of many of these formations would have been a formidable challenge. The question therefore arises, how were thousands of kilograms of stone blocks, wooden beams, tiles, and tools transported to heights of hundreds of meters above the valley floor? Historical accounts mention the use of ropes, nets, and pulley systems operated by winches. According to traditional descriptions, materials and even people were hauled upward in large woven nets suspended from wooden cranes anchored at the edge of the cliffs. These cranes were operated by monks who turned massive wooden drums or capstans to raise the loads. While such systems may explain the movement of small quantities of supplies, many researchers question whether they could realistically account for the massive volume of building materials required to construct entire monasteries. Medieval rope technology, typically made from plant fibers such as hemp, had limits in both tensile strength and durability. Repeatedly lifting heavy loads hundreds of meters into the air would place enormous stress on such ropes, raising the possibility of frequent failures. Furthermore, the first cranes and pulley systems would have needed to be installed on the summits before any lifting could occur. This presents an even deeper puzzle. How were the initial mechanical systems placed at the top of cliffs that had no access routes? Some scholars have suggested that early builders may have used extremely long wooden ladders or primitive climbing routes to reach the summits. Others propose that the monks carved footholds or narrow stairways into the rock faces before the main construction began. However, many of the rock pillars appear too smooth and vertical to support such methods without modern climbing equipment. Or another possibility is that temporary scaffolding systems were constructed from timber anchored into cracks in the rock. Yet there is little surviving evidence for these structures, and their stability on sheer cliffs remains uncertain. Even if a small team of climbers managed to reach the summit initially, transporting heavy beams and stone blocks afterward would still require a sophisticated mechanical lifting system. Some engineers who have studied the site argue that the cranes described in historical records must have been far larger and more advanced than commonly imagined, possibly incorporating compound pulley arrangements to multiply lifting force. But because few original mechanical components have survived, the exact design of these lifting devices remains unknown. The mystery becomes even more striking when considering how long the construction of the Meteora Monasteries lasted. Many of them were built gradually during the 14th and 15th centuries, meaning large quantities of materials had to be transported up the cliffs continuously for years. Along with stone and timber, daily necessities such as food, water, and tools also had to be hauled upward. Some monasteries collected rainwater and maintained small gardens on the summit, yet they still depended on regular supplies from the valley below. The lifting systems therefore had to operate repeatedly and reliably. According to monastic tradition, ropes were replaced only when the Lord let them break, a phrase that reflects both faith and the precarious nature of the system. Beyond the challenge of transportation, the engineering of the monasteries themselves also raises questions. Many of the rock summits are uneven and sloping, rather than flat, forcing builders to carefully shape foundations and distribute weight across irregular stone surfaces. In some cases, the bedrock was carved to create level platforms, while in others, masonry walls were added to stabilize the terrain. Despite these difficulties, many Meteora buildings have remained standing for centuries, surviving earthquakes, storms, and constant erosion. Their durability suggests that the builders possessed a remarkable intuitive understanding of balance, structural stability, and the properties of stone and wood. Ultimately, the Meteora Monasteries stand as a powerful symbol of human determination and ingenuity in the face of extreme natural obstacles. Even today, historians cannot fully explain every detail of their construction, especially the exact methods used to transport materials to such extraordinary heights. Suspended between earth and sky, the monasteries of Meteora Monasteries continue to inspire wonder, much like they must have inspired the monks who first envisioned a sanctuary above the clouds. In your opinion, how did the medieval monks manage to transport tons of construction materials to the tops of the towering rock pillars of Meteora Monasteries? Could simple rope and pulley systems really have been enough? Or might there have been a construction technique that we still do not fully understand today? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. Perched dramatically atop a steep volcanic plug, rising beside the sacred slopes of Mount Popa in central Myanmar, the striking monastery known as Taung Kalat Monastery appears almost impossible at first glance. The structure crowns a narrow column of hardened volcanic rock that towers high above the surrounding plains, creating the illusion of a temple floating between earth and sky. For centuries, this dramatic sanctuary has drawn pilgrims, travelers, and researchers alike, not only because of its spiritual significance, but also because of the remarkable engineering questions it raises. Built atop a volcanic formation left behind after an ancient eruption eroded away the surrounding mountain, and Taung Kalat stands on what geologists call a volcanic plug, a solid core of magma that cooled deep within the volcano before the outer layers disappeared over millennia. The result is a nearly vertical stone tower whose summit provides only a limited and uneven platform. Yet on this precarious peak, a complex of shrines, terraces, stairways, and golden stupas has somehow been constructed and maintained for generations. The very existence of such a monastery in this location immediately raises an obvious question. How was it possible to build and sustain an architectural complex on such a narrow and unstable-looking summit? Reaching Taung Kalat requires climbing a winding staircase of more than 700 steps that spiral around the rocky column. Today, the path is partially sheltered and reinforced. But historically, the ascent would have been far more dangerous, hugging the natural contours of the rock face while navigating steep angles and exposed edges. Every beam, stone block, and decorative element used in the monastery had to be transported upward along this narrow route, sometimes over near-vertical terrain. Considering the technological limitations of earlier centuries, the logistics alone seem daunting. There is little surviving documentation explaining the original methods used to haul construction materials to the summit, leaving historians to speculate about the use of ropes, wooden scaffolding, human chains of laborers, or temporary ramps anchored into the rock itself. Even if such methods were employed, the process would have required exceptional coordination and careful planning. The difficulty of reaching the site makes the monastery's existence even more intriguing, as it suggests that the builders possessed not only determination but also a sophisticated understanding of how to work with extreme landscapes. Yet among all the mysteries surrounding Taung Kalat, the most fascinating involves the problem of structural stability on the summit itself. Unlike broad mountain plateaus, where large temples can spread their foundations across stable ground, the top of this volcanic plug offers only a cramped and irregular surface composed of jagged basaltic rock. In many places, the terrain slopes sharply, and natural fractures run through the stone. Despite these limitations, the summit hosts multiple religious structures, prayer halls, shrines dedicated to spiritual guardians, and small terraces where pilgrims gather. The ability to construct and maintain buildings on such a restricted surface suggests that the builders had to carefully adapt their architectural techniques to the geological conditions. One possibility is that they carved shallow terraces directly into the rock, creating level platforms that could support masonry walls. Another theory proposes that the builders drilled anchor points into the volcanic stone, inserting wooden or metal supports that tied the structures directly to the bedrock. Volcanic plugs are extremely hard and dense formations, meaning that carving or drilling into them would have required specialized tools and considerable effort. Even today, modern engineers would approach such a construction challenge with detailed geological surveys and reinforcement systems, and yet the monastery appears to have achieved long-term stability with far simpler means. The arrangement of buildings on the summit reveals an intricate balancing act between architecture and terrain. Rather than imposing a rigid geometric plan, the structures appear to follow the natural contours of the rock, clustering around small ledges and ridges. This suggests that the builders deliberately integrated the architecture with the geological form of the volcanic plug. By aligning walls and foundations along natural fractures or flatter surfaces, they may have reduced the risk of structural stress. The terraces and stairways also help distribute weight across multiple levels rather than concentrating it in one location. Over centuries, this careful adaptation has allowed the monastery to endure despite constant exposure to wind, rain, and temperature fluctuations. At such elevations, storms can strike with sudden intensity, and tropical monsoon rains can erode poorly anchored structures in only a few decades. Yet Taung Kalat has remained perched on its rocky pedestal for generations, suggesting that the builders understood far more about load distribution and natural stability than historical records reveal. Adding to the mystery is the spiritual dimension of the site. Taung Kalat is not only a Buddhist monastery, but also one of the most important centers of Nat worship in Myanmar. In traditional Burmese belief, Nats are powerful spirits associated with natural features such as mountains, forests, and rivers. Mount Popa itself has long been considered the dwelling place of these supernatural guardians. And Taung Kalat serves as a focal point for rituals honoring them. Many of the shrines scattered across the summit are dedicated to individual Nats, and their placement often appears carefully chosen, occupying narrow ledges or corners of the rocky platform. This spiritual landscape may have influenced the architectural layout of the monastery, guiding where structures could be placed while preserving certain sacred spaces. If so, the builders faced the additional challenge of satisfying both engineering requirements and religious symbolism. Constructing stable foundations on a volcanic pinnacle while simultaneously accommodating ritual traditions would have required a deep familiarity with the terrain, as well as the cultural significance attached to it. Despite centuries of attention from pilgrims and travelers, but the earliest stages of the monastery's construction remain poorly documented. Some historical accounts suggest that major expansions occurred during the 19th century when Burmese kings and wealthy patrons sponsored the renovation of religious sites across the region. However, local traditions insist that Taung Kalat had already been a sacred location long before these renovations took place. If earlier shrines existed on the summit, then the original builders would have faced the same formidable engineering challenge of anchoring structures to a narrow volcanic peak. The absence of detailed records leaves modern researchers with only fragments of evidence. Weathered masonry, partially carved terraces, and architectural features that hint at multiple phases of construction. Each layer of renovation may have concealed the techniques used by earlier builders, making it difficult to determine how the first foundations were established. Today, Taung Kalat Monastery stands not only as a place of devotion, but also as a powerful reminder of humanity's ability to adapt architecture to extreme environments. Rising from a narrow volcanic column beside Mount Popa, its golden spires continue to captivate visitors from around the world. Yet behind this serene beauty lies an enduring mystery. How did ancient builders stabilize an entire religious complex on such a small and uneven summit with limited tools and access? The answers remain uncertain, but the monastery's survival suggests its creators possessed a remarkable understanding of geology, balance, and structural stability. Today, Taung Kalat stands as a testament to the ingenuity of past builders who transformed an almost impossible peak of stone into one of Southeast Asia's most extraordinary sacred sites. How do you think ancient builders managed to create foundations strong enough to support an entire monastery on top of such a narrow volcanic rock? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. Rising above the dense emerald canopy of the Guatemalan rainforest, the towering silhouette of Temple 4 stands as one of the most remarkable achievements of the ancient Maya civilization. Located within the vast ruins of Tikal, one of the largest and most powerful cities of the classic Maya world, Temple 4 dominates the landscape with a height of approximately 65 meters, making it the tallest structure ever built by the Maya and one of the tallest pre-Columbian constructions in the Americas. Completed around the year 741, under the reign of the powerful ruler Yikin Chan Kawil, the pyramid was erected during the height of Tikal's political and cultural power. Yet despite decades of archaeological research, Temple 4 continues to raise profound questions about the technological capabilities of the Maya. Built deep within a tropical jungle environment, and long before the arrival of metal tools, wheeled transport, or draft animals, the pyramid represents a level of architectural organization and engineering sophistication that still fascinates researchers today. Constructing such a monumental structure in the middle of a dense rainforest would have been an extraordinary logistical challenge. The pyramid was built from enormous quantities of limestone blocks, quarried from the surrounding region, with many stones weighing hundreds of kilograms. Without iron tools, pulleys, cranes, or animals capable of hauling heavy loads, the Maya relied almost entirely on human labor. Archaeologists have long debated how the builders transported these stones across uneven terrain and then lifted them to heights exceeding 60 meters, as some researchers believe that massive earthen ramps may have been constructed around the pyramid during its construction, allowing workers to drag materials upward step by step. However, the scale of such ramps would have required astonishing amounts of soil and labor, and clear archaeological traces of these structures remain elusive. This has left open the possibility that the Maya may have employed construction strategies that are still not fully understood today. Equally remarkable is the pyramid's stability. Temple 4 was erected on terrain typical of tropical lowland rainforest, where heavy rainfall, humidity, and soft soil conditions usually make large stone construction extremely difficult. Yet the structure has endured for more than 12 centuries, surviving seasonal storms, plant growth, and gradual environmental changes. Excavations and structural studies have revealed that the Maya used complex layering techniques inside the pyramid, combining rubble fill, compacted soil, carefully placed stone blocks, and lime-based mortar to create a solid core. The outer-facing stones were fitted with notable precision, distributing weight evenly across the structure's steep slopes. Even so, many details of how the builders engineered such long-term structural stability remain uncertain, particularly because large portions of the pyramid's interior have never been fully excavated. The steep proportions of Temple 4 also distinguish it from many other Maya pyramids. Its sharply rising stairways and narrow summit temple create an almost vertical visual impression, suggesting a careful balance between architectural ambition and structural safety. The pyramid's summit once supported an elaborate temple structure topped by a monumental roof comb, a distinctive feature of Maya architecture consisting of a tall decorative stone framework rising above the temple roof. This structure would have been adorned with massive sculptural elements and carved imagery, dramatically increasing the total height of the building and making it visible from great distances across the forest canopy. Constructing such a feature at the very top of an already towering pyramid would have required extremely careful engineering to prevent imbalance or collapse, further illustrating the advanced architectural knowledge possessed by Maya builders. The placement of Temple 4 itself may also reflect sophisticated planning. Standing atop one of the highest natural points within the ancient city, the pyramid offers sweeping views over the surrounding jungle and toward other major monuments of Tikal. From its summit, several of the city's central temples can be seen rising above the trees, suggesting the possibility that these structures were positioned with deliberate visual or ceremonial relationships in mind. Some researchers have proposed that Temple 4 may have served as an observational platform for tracking astronomical events important to the Maya calendar, such as solstices or equinoxes. While these hypotheses remain debated, they highlight the possibility that the pyramid was not merely a monument to royal power, but also part of a broader cosmological landscape, integrated with Maya ritual and astronomical traditions. Yet among all the remarkable aspects of Temple 4's construction, one of the most intriguing technological mysteries lies in the material that binds the entire structure together: the lime mortar used by Maya builders. This substance, seemingly simple at first glance, represents a technological achievement that continues to surprise scientists studying ancient construction techniques. The mortar was produced through the process of burning limestone at extremely high temperatures, often estimated between 800 and 900 degrees Celsius. Achieving such temperatures would have required enormous quantities of fuel, most likely in the form of wood harvested from the surrounding forest. This alone raises significant questions about the scale of resource management required to sustain large-scale lime production in the ancient Maya world. Producing the vast amounts of lime needed for monumental projects like Temple 4 would have demanded careful organization, skilled labor, and a deep understanding of materials. Once produced, the lime was mixed with water and other components to create a binding mortar that held the stone blocks together. What astonishes researchers today is the extraordinary durability of this material. More than 1,000 years after the pyramid's construction, many sections of the mortar remain intact, continuing to hold the stones firmly in place despite centuries of tropical weathering. Recent microscopic studies have revealed that Maya lime mortar possesses a surprisingly complex internal structure. The chemical reactions that occur during the lime production and curing process appear to create mineral formations that strengthen the material over time, allowing it to resist cracking and erosion in ways that resemble, in some respects, the long-lasting properties of Roman concrete. In the humid, rain-soaked environment of the Guatemalan rainforest, where modern building materials often degrade rapidly, the survival of Maya mortar for over a millennium is nothing short of remarkable. The mystery deepens when researchers consider the scale of lime usage throughout Tikal. Lime was not only used as mortar, but also for plastering temple surfaces, coating plazas, and then creating smooth white facades that would have reflected sunlight across the city. Producing such vast quantities of lime would have required an industrial-scale operation by ancient standards. Some scholars estimate that millions of tons of limestone may have been processed over the centuries of Tikal's development. Yet the precise methods by which the Maya organized this production, managed fuel consumption, and maintained consistent material quality remain poorly understood. Even today, replicating the exact properties of ancient Maya lime mortar has proven difficult for modern researchers attempting experimental reconstructions. Temple 4 stands not only as a towering pyramid, but as a symbol of the advanced technological knowledge of the ancient Maya. Rising above the rainforest canopy more than 12 centuries after its construction, it challenges modern assumptions about what a civilization without metal tools or machines could achieve. The massive stones, steep design, elevated temple platform, and especially the remarkably durable lime mortar all reveal a level of engineering skill that is still not fully understood. Even today, as archaeologists continue studying the ruins of Tikal, Temple 4 remains a powerful reminder that many secrets of Maya construction and technology may still lie hidden within the ancient stones of the jungle. What do you think truly allowed the Maya to create a lime mortar strong enough to hold Temple 4 together for more than 1,000 years in the harsh, tropical rainforest environment? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. High above the rugged mountains of southeastern Turkey stands one of the most enigmatic monuments of the ancient world, the sanctuary of Nemrut Dağ. Rising more than 2,000 meters above sea level, this extraordinary archaeological site crowns the summit of a remote mountain in what was once the ancient kingdom of Commagene. Built during the 1st century BCE by the ambitious ruler Antiochus I Theos of Commagene, the sanctuary was intended to serve as a monumental religious complex and possibly the king's own eternal resting place. Yet despite more than a century of archaeological study, Nemrut Dağ continues to challenge historians and engineers alike, raising profound questions about the technological capabilities of the ancient builders who created this astonishing complex in one of the most inhospitable locations imaginable. But what immediately sets Nemrut Dağ apart from almost every other ancient monument is its location. Unlike temples and palaces that were built in fertile valleys or along major trade routes, this sanctuary was constructed on the very summit of a steep and isolated mountain. Even today, reaching the top requires navigating winding mountain roads and climbing steep paths that cut through rocky terrain. In antiquity, however, such infrastructure did not exist. The mountain would have been far more difficult to access, with no modern transportation, no cranes, and no mechanical lifting equipment. Yet somehow the builders of Nemrut Dağ managed to transport enormous stone blocks and sculpt colossal statues at an altitude where even basic construction would have been extremely challenging. The statues that line the eastern and western terraces of the sanctuary once stood between 8 and 10 meters tall and were carved from massive limestone blocks weighing many tons each. The sheer scale of these sculptures raises one of the site's most persistent mysteries. How were such immense stones quarried, transported, and assembled on the summit of a mountain over 2,000 meters high? The question becomes even more perplexing when one considers the logistical realities of ancient construction. Moving stones, weighing several tons across flat terrain, already required tremendous effort in the ancient world, often involving large teams of workers, sledges, rollers, and carefully prepared roads. But Nemrut Dağ stands far from any major quarry sites and is surrounded by steep slopes and uneven ground. Scholars have long debated whether the stone was quarried locally from the mountain itself or transported from lower elevations. If the stones were cut directly from nearby rock formations, the builders still faced the immense challenge of shaping and positioning them precisely on narrow terraces carved into the summit. If, on the other hand, the stones were transported upward from the surrounding valleys, the operation would have required an extraordinary level of organization and engineering. There is little archaeological evidence for large-scale ramps, roads, or transport systems leading to the summit, leaving researchers to speculate about the methods that might have been used. Some theories suggest wooden sledges pulled by hundreds of laborers, while others propose temporary earthen ramps that have long since eroded away. Yet none of these explanations fully account for the magnitude of the task. At the center of the sanctuary lies another remarkable and mysterious structure, a gigantic artificial mound known as a tumulus. Rising roughly 50 meters high and composed of millions of small crushed stones, this cone-shaped hill dominates the summit of Nemrut Dağ. It is widely believed to conceal the tomb of King Antiochus himself, yet despite decades of investigation, the burial chamber has never been definitively located. The mound appears to have been deliberately designed to prevent excavation. Whenever archaeologists attempt to dig into it, the loose stones shift and collapse, making it nearly impossible to penetrate deeply without destabilizing the entire structure. As a result, the supposed royal tomb remains hidden somewhere beneath the enormous mass of stones, one of the most elusive burial sites in the ancient world. Surrounding the tumulus on the eastern and western terraces are rows of monumental statues representing a remarkable fusion of cultural traditions. The figures include deities associated with both Greek and Persian mythology, reflecting the unique position of the Commagene kingdom between the Hellenistic and Iranian worlds. Zeus, Apollo, and Heracles appear alongside Persian divine forms, while Antiochus himself is depicted among the gods as a semi-divine ruler. Each statue once formed part of a seated colossus, with the massive heads now lying scattered across the terraces after centuries of earthquakes and weathering. Even in their fallen state, these heads remain awe-inspiring. Their carefully carved facial features reveal an impressive level of artistic sophistication, especially considering the remote and extreme environment in which they were created. The layout of the sanctuary also hints at possible astronomical significance. The eastern terrace faces the direction of sunrise, while the western terrace overlooks the setting sun. Visitors who reach the summit at dawn or dusk witness the statues illuminated by dramatic shifts of light across the mountains, a spectacle that may have held deep ritual meaning for ancient observers. Some researchers have proposed that the sanctuary functioned partly as a ceremonial observatory aligned with solar cycles or seasonal events. A famous relief discovered at the site appears to depict a configuration of stars and planets, leading some scholars to speculate that it records a specific astronomical date associated with Antiochus's reign. Despite these discoveries, the greatest mystery of Nemrut Dağ remains the astonishing achievement of constructing such a monumental complex on the summit of a mountain. The engineering, logistics, and manpower required must have been immense, with workers operating in harsh, high-altitude conditions while transporting food, water, tools, and massive stone blocks to the peak over many years. Today, the site stands as a silent testament to the ambition of the ancient kingdom of Commagene. Although archaeologists have uncovered much about its history, the practical methods used to build the sanctuary remain one of the most intriguing unsolved puzzles of ancient engineering. How ancient builders managed to move and shape enormous stones at such altitude, and what secrets may still lie hidden beneath the great tumulus, continues to fascinate researchers and visitors alike. How do you think ancient builders managed to transport and place massive stone blocks on top of Nemrut Dağ, a mountain more than 2,000 meters high over 2,000 years ago? Share your theory in the comments below. Rising abruptly from the vast emptiness of the Cholistan Desert in Pakistan, Derawar Fort appears less like a typical desert fortress and more like a colossal architectural statement carved into the horizon. Surrounded by endless dunes and scorching winds, the fortress dominates the landscape with its massive circular bastions and towering defensive walls that seem almost improbable in such an unforgiving environment. From a distance, the structure resembles a monumental ring of red-brown stone rising out of the desert sands, its sheer scale immediately raising questions about how such a fortress could have been built, supplied, and maintained in one of the harshest regions of South Asia. Historically associated with the rulers of the region and expanded during later dynasties, the fortress stands today not only as a relic of political power, but also as a silent testimony to engineering capabilities that continue to puzzle historians, archaeologists, and architectural researchers. At the core of its mystery lies the enormous logistical challenge of constructing such a massive fortification deep within the desert. Derawar Fort stretches for roughly 1.5 kilometers around its perimeter and is reinforced by 40 immense circular bastions that rise dramatically above the surrounding sand. Each bastion appears designed not merely as a decorative element, but as a carefully calculated defensive structure, allowing defenders to monitor the surrounding landscape from multiple angles and eliminate blind spots along the walls. Yet the true puzzle lies not only in the defensive strategy, but in the practical realities of building the fortress in the first place. Millions of bricks would have been required to erect walls of such thickness and height, and each brick needed clay, water, and an immense amount of heat for firing. In the middle of the Cholistan Desert, where vegetation is scarce and fuel sources are limited, the question of how these bricks were produced at such scale becomes a profound mystery. If they were fired locally, vast quantities of fuel must have been transported or harvested from distant regions, requiring an organized supply network that would have been astonishing for its time. If they were transported from elsewhere, the logistical effort of moving so many heavy materials across desert terrain would have required a complex system of caravans, laborers, and possibly animals coordinated with remarkable efficiency. Equally intriguing is the strategic placement of the fortress on slightly elevated terrain, often described as a citadel hill within the otherwise flat desert environment. Even a modest elevation in such an open landscape would dramatically improve visibility, allowing guards to detect approaching caravans or armies from many kilometers away. This position also suggests that Derawar Fort may have served not merely as a defensive structure, but as a key node along ancient trade routes that once crossed the desert between Central Asia, Persia, and the Indian subcontinent. Such merchants traveling through the region may have relied on fortified outposts like this one for protection, taxation points, or supply stops, turning the fortress into both a military installation and an economic checkpoint. However, archaeological evidence about the exact nature of these trade networks remains incomplete, leaving historians to reconstruct the fortress's role through scattered historical references and the clues preserved in its architecture. Among all the mysteries surrounding Derawar Fort, perhaps the most astonishing is the extraordinary durability of the materials used in its construction. The fortress walls, built largely from fired brick and bonded with ancient mortar, have endured centuries of relentless desert conditions that would normally erode lesser structures. But the Cholistan Desert is not a gentle environment for architecture. Temperatures can soar to extreme levels during the day and drop significantly at night, creating constant cycles of thermal expansion and contraction. Powerful desert winds carry fine sand particles that gradually grind away exposed surfaces, and occasional seasonal rains can introduce moisture that weakens poorly made materials. Yet despite these challenges, large portions of Derawar Fort's walls remain standing with remarkable stability, their massive bastions still towering over the desert as they did generations ago. This resilience has drawn the attention of engineers and material scientists who seek to understand how the fortress's construction materials have resisted degradation for so long. The fired bricks themselves appear to possess unusual density and strength, suggesting that the ancient brickmakers achieved exceptionally high firing temperatures or used carefully selected clay mixtures that produced more durable building units. Even more intriguing is the mortar that binds these bricks together. In many places, the mortar joints remain firmly intact despite centuries of environmental stress. Some researchers suspect that the mortar may contain a sophisticated mixture of lime, mineral ash, and organic additives that enhanced its bonding strength and resistance to weathering. Similar techniques were used in other ancient civilizations, such as the Romans, whose volcanic ash-based concrete famously hardened over time and became stronger when exposed to certain environmental conditions. And whether the builders of Derawar Fort independently developed a comparable formula or inherited construction traditions from earlier regional cultures remains an open question. Chemical analyses of surviving mortar samples have revealed complex mineral compositions, but the precise recipe used by the original builders has yet to be fully reconstructed. The possibility that ancient engineers possessed specialized knowledge of materials science, knowledge that was gradually lost or transformed over the centuries, adds another layer of fascination to the study of the fortress. Architectural evidence also suggests that Derawar Fort was not constructed in a single phase, but evolved through multiple stages of expansion and reinforcement. Variations in brick size, mortar composition, hull and wall thickness indicate that different rulers may have modified or strengthened the fortress over time, adapting it to changing military technologies and political circumstances. As artillery weapons became more prominent in regional warfare, thicker and more resilient walls would have been necessary to withstand bombardment. Some bastions appear to have been reinforced or rebuilt during later periods, demonstrating an ongoing process of architectural adaptation. Yet even these modifications seem to have respected the original structural principles that gave the fortress its durability. The survival of Derawar Fort across centuries of environmental exposure, political upheaval, and partial abandonment raises a profound question about the nature of ancient engineering knowledge. Here, modern construction often relies on advanced machinery and standardized industrial materials, yet many contemporary structures struggle to endure even a fraction of the time that ancient monuments have survived. The builders of Derawar Fort, working with comparatively simple tools and technologies, managed to create a structure capable of resisting desert winds, shifting sands, and extreme temperatures for hundreds of years. Their understanding of materials, geometry, and structural stability must have been far more sophisticated than historical records alone might suggest. Today, Derawar Fort stands as both a historic landmark and a lasting architectural mystery. Its towering bastions stretch across the desert skyline, reminding visitors that ancient engineering achievements often surpass modern expectations. In more than a relic of regional power, the fortress reflects remarkable human ingenuity in an extreme environment. The unusual durability of its materials continues to puzzle scientists trying to recreate ancient construction methods, ensuring that Derawar Fort remains one of the most fascinating architectural enigmas of South Asia. What do you think is the greatest mystery of Derawar Fort? The extraordinary durability of its construction materials, the engineering required to build it in the middle of the desert, or the possibility that ancient technical knowledge has been lost? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Perched high above the forests of Guizhou Province in southwestern China, the temple complex atop Mount Fanjing stands as one of the most extraordinary examples of religious architecture ever built in an extreme natural landscape. Rising from the mist-covered peaks of the Wuling Mountains, the sacred summit known as the Red Cloud's Golden Summit appears almost unreal, a towering column of weathered rock split dramatically into two narrow spires, each crowned by a small temple that seems to cling to the very edge of the sky. At first glance, the sight inspires awe because of its breathtaking beauty, but the deeper one looks, the more puzzling its existence becomes. The greatest mystery lies not in the temples themselves, but in the astonishing fact that they were built on top of a nearly vertical rock formation that would challenge even modern engineers today. Long before cranes, helicopters, or modern climbing equipment existed, builders somehow managed to construct religious structures on a peak that rises sharply from the surrounding mountain. Its sides steep and unforgiving, its summit barely wide enough to hold the temples that now rest upon it. The Red Cloud's Golden Summit, the most iconic point of Mount Fanjing, rises to more than 2,400 meters above sea level and is formed from a massive block of rock that has been split down the middle by a deep natural fissure. The two halves of this fractured summit stand like twin pillars, and on each pillar rests a small Buddhist shrine connected by a narrow stone bridge. We get the architectural marvel that captures the imagination of historians and engineers alike is not simply the presence of these temples, but the almost impossible logistics required to build them in such a place. The summit itself is not a broad plateau where construction could proceed easily. Instead, it is a steep and irregular stone spine with sheer cliffs dropping hundreds of meters on all sides. The area where the temples stand is extremely limited, forcing the builders to work on a dangerously narrow surface while exposed to powerful winds, shifting weather, and constant clouds that often envelop the mountain. Even today, reaching the summit requires climbing thousands of stone steps that twist up the mountainside through forests and cliffs, a journey that can take hours. The question that continues to puzzle researchers is simple yet profound. How did builders centuries ago transport the enormous quantities of materials required to create these structures to a place that is so difficult to reach even now? Historical records suggest that the temples in their present form were constructed during the Ming dynasty, although Mount Fanjing had already been revered as a sacred Buddhist mountain long before that time. Pilgrims believed the mountain to be the spiritual dwelling place of Maitreya, the future Buddha, which gave the site enormous religious importance. Because of this sacred status, temples and shrines were gradually established along the slopes and peaks of the mountain. Yet constructing a shrine at the summit of the Red Cloud's Golden Summit was an undertaking that seems almost unimaginable. Ye builders would have had to haul timber beams, carved stone blocks, roof tiles, tools, and other materials up a route that in many places consisted of little more than narrow ledges or rough paths carved into the rock. Some scholars believe that temporary wooden scaffolding and rope and pulley systems might have been installed along the cliffs to lift materials upward step by step. Others suggest that teams of workers could have used primitive hoisting devices anchored into the rock face. However, no definitive archaeological evidence of these systems survives today, leaving the precise methods used by the builders largely unknown. The challenge of transporting materials becomes even more extraordinary when one considers the shape of the summit itself. Unlike most mountain peaks that offer at least some relatively flat terrain, the Red Cloud's Golden Summit rises like a jagged blade of stone. The top is narrow and uneven, and the two temple sites sit on separated rock pinnacles divided by a natural crack in the mountain. Constructing even a single building in such conditions would require extraordinary skill and planning. Yet here, two temples were erected on opposite sides of the split summit. The builders not only had to create stable foundations anchored into the natural rock, but also had to ensure that the structures could withstand the powerful winds and severe weather conditions that frequently sweep across the mountaintop. At such elevations, storms can form quickly, bringing heavy rain, thick fog, and sudden gusts of wind that place immense stress on any structure exposed to them. The fact that these temples have endured for centuries suggests that the builders possessed a remarkable understanding of how to anchor wooden and stone elements directly into the mountain's bedrock. Another striking feature of the complex is the narrow stone bridge that connects the two temples across the natural fissure dividing the summit. This bridge, though small, represents an impressive feat of construction because it had to be built in a location where workers would have been suspended hundreds of meters above the ground. The fissure itself drops steeply between the two halves of the summit, and the bridge spans the gap with surprising precision. The builders had to carefully align the stones so that the bridge would remain stable despite constant exposure to wind and weather. Considering the limited space available for construction and the absence of modern safety equipment, the work required to complete this bridge must have been extremely dangerous. The precision with which the stones were positioned suggests that the builders were highly experienced in working with mountainous terrain and understood how to balance weight and stress in confined spaces. Equally impressive is the staircase that leads to the summit temples, a dramatic series of steep stone steps carved directly into the mountain itself. These steps wind up the rock face in a tight spiral, hugging the contours of the cliff as they climb toward the peak. In many places, the staircase becomes so narrow and steep that visitors must hold onto railings while ascending, and carving such a staircase into the solid rock would have required immense labor and careful planning, as each step had to be shaped precisely to ensure stability and safety. Over the centuries, countless pilgrims have climbed these steps despite harsh weather conditions and the constant risk of erosion. The durability of the staircase demonstrates the extraordinary craftsmanship of the builders, who managed to shape the rock in a way that has resisted the forces of nature for hundreds of years. The survival of the Mount Fanjing temples, through centuries of storms, earthquakes, and environmental change, raises further questions about the techniques used in their construction. Mountain peaks are among the most unstable environments for buildings, yet the temples appear firmly integrated into the rock beneath them. Some researchers believe that the builders deliberately use natural cracks and grooves in the stone to anchor beams and foundation elements, effectively tying the structures into the mountain itself. This method would allow the buildings to move slightly with the rock during strong winds or seismic activity without collapsing. However, because the original construction methods were rarely documented in detail, much of this remains speculation based on architectural analysis rather than direct historical evidence. Beyond the engineering puzzles, the location of the temples also reflects deep symbolic meaning. In Buddhist tradition, mountains are often seen as places where the earthly world meets the spiritual realm. By placing temples on a summit that seems almost unreachable, the builders may have intended to represent the difficult journey toward enlightenment. Pilgrims who climb thousands of steps to reach the peak experience a physical and spiritual challenge that mirrors this symbolic ascent. Yet even within this religious context, the question of how such a construction project was actually accomplished continues to fascinate historians and engineers. The sheer verticality of the Red Cloud's golden summit, combined with the limited technology available at the time of construction, suggests that the builders achieved something far more ambitious than many historical records fully describe. Today, the temples of Mount Fanjing remain a remarkable example of human ingenuity in an extreme landscape. Rising from the clouds, they testify to a construction effort that pushed the limits of what was possible centuries ago. Somehow, long before modern machinery existed, builders transported materials, carved stairways, anchored foundations, and erected temples on a rock formation that appears almost vertical. Their methods are still not fully understood, leaving the Mount Fanjing temple complex both a sacred pilgrimage site and a lasting mystery of ancient engineering. How do you think ancient builders managed to transport materials and construct temples on a nearly vertical rock summit like Mount Fanjing without modern technology? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. High in the rugged mountains of the Peruvian Andes lies one of the most remarkable archaeological sites ever discovered. The Machu Picchu, often referred to as the Sanctuary of Machu Picchu. Built in the 15th century by the powerful Inca civilization, this extraordinary complex sits more than 2,400 meters above sea level, perched on a narrow mountain ridge surrounded by steep valleys and dense cloud forest. The dramatic location alone raises immediate questions about how such an ambitious construction project could have been carried out in such an inaccessible environment. Yet what truly astonishes archaeologists, engineers, and historians is not only the location of Machu Picchu, but the extraordinary level of technical sophistication evident in its architecture, particularly the astonishing precision of its stone construction. Despite centuries of study since its scientific introduction to the world in 1911 by the explorer Hiram Bingham III, many aspects of the engineering techniques used to build Machu Picchu remain deeply mysterious. The most striking technological feature of Machu Picchu is the remarkable method of stone construction often described as Inca ashlar masonry. Throughout the sanctuary, massive blocks of granite, some weighing several tons, are fitted together with an almost unbelievable degree of precision. Unlike many ancient civilizations that relied on mortar to hold stones together, and the builders of Machu Picchu shaped each stone so carefully that the blocks interlock perfectly without any binding material at all. The joints between the stones are so tight that even a thin blade cannot easily be inserted between them. What makes this achievement even more remarkable is that many of the stones are not simple rectangular blocks. Instead, they are cut into irregular polygonal shapes with multiple angles and faces, allowing them to lock together like pieces of an intricate three-dimensional puzzle. In some walls, a single stone may connect with several neighboring stones along complex edges, creating a surface that is both structurally stable and visually seamless. The result is a form of construction that appears almost organic, as if the stones naturally grew together rather than being assembled by human hands. And this extraordinary level of craftsmanship raises a profound technological mystery. Granite is an extremely hard rock, and shaping it with such precision would normally require durable metal tools, advanced measuring techniques, and extensive engineering knowledge. Yet the Inca civilization did not possess iron or steel tools in the conventional sense. Archaeological evidence suggests that they relied primarily on stone tools, hammerstones, and possibly bronze implements, materials that seem insufficient for carving granite with the level of accuracy visible in Machu Picchu's walls. Furthermore, the stones were not quarried and cut in a modern workshop environment. Thus, many were extracted from local quarries on the mountain itself, and then carefully shaped and fitted into position on steep terrain where transporting heavy materials would have been extraordinarily difficult. The process required not only immense labor, but also a level of planning and precision that continues to puzzle modern engineers. Some researchers believe the builders repeatedly placed and removed stones, slowly grinding their surfaces until they fit perfectly against neighboring blocks, a painstaking technique that may have taken months for a single stone. Even if this explanation is correct, the sheer scale of the project suggests an organizational and technical capability far beyond what was once assumed for the Inca. The precision stonework of Machu Picchu also served an important structural purpose. The Andes Mountains lie in a region of frequent earthquakes, yet the buildings of Machu Picchu have survived for more than 5 centuries with relatively little structural damage. The interlocking stones function almost like a flexible architectural system. During seismic activity, the blocks can shift slightly and then settle back into place without cracking or collapsing. The irregular shapes of the stones distribute mechanical stress across multiple contact points, reducing the likelihood of catastrophic failure. Modern engineers sometimes compare this ancient method to advanced earthquake-resistant design principles used in contemporary architecture, suggesting that the builders of Machu Picchu may have possessed an intuitive understanding of seismic resilience. Beyond the extraordinary stone masonry, the sanctuary also demonstrates impressive achievements in hydraulic engineering and environmental adaptation. Machu Picchu receives heavy rainfall throughout much of the year, and the entire city was constructed on steep mountain slopes vulnerable to erosion and landslides. To address this challenge, the Inca engineers created an elaborate drainage system integrated into the terraces, plazas, and buildings. Beneath the visible surface of the city lies a hidden network of gravel layers, stone channels, and underground conduits that allow water to flow safely through the site without destabilizing the structures above. In fact, archaeologists estimate that a large portion of Machu Picchu's construction effort was devoted to drainage and foundation work rather than visible architecture. This invisible engineering ensured that the city could endure centuries of rainfall while maintaining structural stability. Another puzzle concerns the transportation of the massive stone blocks used throughout the sanctuary. The Inca civilization did not employ wheeled vehicles for construction, nor did they possess draft animals capable of pulling extremely heavy loads. Yet thousands of large stones were somehow moved across mountainous terrain and carefully placed within the complex. Some scholars suggest that workers used a combination of ramps, ropes made from plant fibers, wooden rollers, and coordinated human labor. Others propose that the stones were quarried close to their final positions to minimize transportation. Even with these explanations, however, the logistical challenge remains extraordinary, as certain structures within Machu Picchu also appear to demonstrate sophisticated astronomical awareness. One of the most famous features is the ceremonial stone, known as Intihuatana, often interpreted as a ritual device connected with solar observation. Nearby buildings, such as the Temple of the Sun, include windows and architectural alignments that interact with sunlight during important moments of the solar year, particularly the solstices. These alignments suggest that the sanctuary may have served not only as a political or residential center, but also as a sacred landscape where astronomy, religion, and architecture were deeply intertwined. Despite more than a century of research, many questions about Machu Picchu remain unresolved. Scholars still debate whether it served as a royal estate, a sacred sanctuary, or a ceremonial pilgrimage center of the Inca civilization. Because the Inca left no written records, much of its history must be reconstructed from architecture and archaeological evidence. Perhaps the greatest mystery is the extraordinary precision of its stone construction. The perfectly fitted stones of Machu Picchu still stand as a remarkable testament to ancient craftsmanship, challenging modern assumptions about the technological capabilities of past civilizations. In your opinion, how did the Inca manage to cut and fit the massive stones at Machu Picchu with near-perfect precision, despite not having modern metal tools? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. Perched high above the rugged landscape of southern France, the fortress known as Château de Quéribus appears less like a conventional castle and more like a natural extension of the mountain itself. Rising dramatically from a narrow limestone peak in the Corbières Range, the citadel stands at an altitude of more than 700 meters above sea level, dominating the surrounding valleys and distant plains. From afar, the structure seems almost impossible, stone walls clinging to the summit of a jagged rock formation exposed to wind, weather, and gravity for centuries. Historians often refer to Quéribus as one of the legendary citadels of the sky, a group of nearly inaccessible mountain fortresses that once marked the frontier between medieval France and the Kingdom of Aragon. Yet beyond its dramatic location and strategic importance, the castle also raises a series of intriguing questions about the technical knowledge and construction methods of the people who built and expanded it during the Middle Ages. The origins of Quéribus remain partly obscured by time. Historical references suggest that a fortress may have existed on the site as early as the 10th century, though the structure visible today largely dates to the 13th century, when the region became entangled in the turbulent history of the Cathar movement and the Albigensian Crusade. For a time, the castle served as one of the final strongholds of the Cathars, a Christian sect declared heretical by the Catholic Church. After the fall of nearby fortresses, Quéribus reportedly held out until the middle of the 13th century before eventually coming under royal control. The French crown then reinforced and modified the structure, transforming it into a border fortress that guarded the frontier with Spain for several centuries. Although its political role gradually diminished after the Treaty of the Pyrenees shifted the border southward, the architectural complexity and remarkable engineering of the site continue to attract historians, archaeologists, and engineers who seek to understand how such a structure could be built in such an extreme location. One of the first mysteries surrounding Quéribus concerns the sheer difficulty of its construction site. The castle stands on a razor-thin ridge of limestone that drops steeply on several sides, leaving very little flat ground on which to build. Transporting building materials to such a height would have been a formidable task in the medieval world. Every block of stone, every beam of timber, every barrel of mortar had to be carried up winding mountain paths long before modern roads or machinery existed. Some researchers believe that builders quarried much of the stone directly from the mountain itself, shaping the fortress out of the very rock on which it stands. Others suggest that a system of wooden cranes, pulleys, and scaffolding may have been used to lift materials upward in stages. Whatever the precise method, the logistics alone would have required careful planning, coordination, and an understanding of structural balance that challenges common assumptions about medieval engineering capabilities. The defensive design of the fortress reveals another level of sophistication. Rather than imposing a rigid geometric layout onto the mountain, the builders shaped the walls to follow the irregular contours of the rock. The result is a structure that blends almost seamlessly with its natural foundation, as if the mountain itself had grown defensive towers and stone ramparts. Access routes were intentionally narrow and winding, forcing anyone approaching the castle to move slowly through a sequence of gates, stairways, and courtyards that could be easily defended. Such features reflect a deep understanding of topography and military strategy. By integrating architecture with the natural terrain, the designers effectively turned the entire mountain into part of the fortress, maximizing defensive strength while minimizing the need for massive artificial walls. Inside the castle, the most striking architectural space is the Great Hall, located within the main tower. This chamber contains a central stone pillar from which 4 Gothic arches radiate outward to support the vaulted ceiling. The elegance of this structure is remarkable, considering the limited tools available to medieval builders. Each stone block forming the arches had to be cut with precise angles so that the weight of the roof would distribute evenly through the pillar and into the rock below. The geometry required for such a vault is complex, relying on carefully calculated curves and load-bearing lines. When viewed from below, the arches appear almost effortless, yet they represent a sophisticated understanding of structural mechanics that would have been developed through generations of practical experience. Perhaps the most intriguing technical mystery of Quéribus lies in the stonework itself, particularly in the traces left behind by the tools used to shape the blocks. Many of the stones forming the fortress walls display cutting marks that are strikingly consistent across large surfaces. The grooves and planes appear remarkably straight, with edges that meet at sharp angles and surfaces that remain unusually smooth despite centuries of exposure. For archaeologists examining these details, the stonework raises important questions about the technology available to medieval masons. Conventional historical explanations suggest that craftsmen used iron chisels, hammerstones, and wedges to split and shape limestone blocks. These tools were certainly capable of producing well-finished masonry, yet the level of uniformity observed in some sections of Quéribus suggests a degree of control that seems surprisingly advanced for the era. The precision becomes especially noticeable when examining joints between adjacent stones. In several areas of the fortress, the blocks fit together so tightly that very little mortar is visible between them. The surfaces appear to have been carefully flattened so that each stone rests securely against its neighbor, distributing weight evenly throughout the wall. Achieving this level of accuracy would have required repeated measuring, trimming, and testing of each block before it was finally placed. Even a small misalignment could weaken the stability of the structure, especially in a fortress perched on a narrow summit exposed to strong winds. The builders therefore had to balance speed, precision, and structural safety while working under challenging environmental conditions. Some researchers have proposed that the masons working at Quéribus may have inherited techniques passed down from earlier Roman or Mediterranean stone-cutting traditions. Others believe the precision reflects the high level of craftsmanship achieved by specialized guilds of medieval builders who traveled from project to project across Europe. Regardless of the explanation, the stonework demonstrates a mastery of material that continues to fascinate modern observers. When sunlight strikes the pale limestone walls, the subtle tool marks become visible, revealing the rhythm of countless hammer blows delivered centuries ago by craftsmen whose names have long been forgotten. The durability of the fortress further deepens the mystery. Despite standing atop an exposed mountain ridge for more than 700 years, Les Quéribus remains remarkably intact. Its walls have endured relentless winds, storms, and temperature changes that would normally erode poorly constructed structures. The tight fit of the stone blocks, combined with the natural strength of the limestone and the stability of the underlying bedrock, appears to have created a building capable of resisting the forces of nature for centuries. In many ways, the fortress demonstrates how effective medieval engineering could be when combined with careful observation of natural conditions. Today, as visitors climb the steep path to the summit, the fortress still inspires awe. From the top, sweeping views stretch across the valleys of the older region, while the stone walls seem to rise naturally from the mountain itself. Beyond the dramatic scenery lies a deeper story of ingenuity, of perseverance, and technical skill. The precisely cut stones, elegant Gothic vaults, and the seamless integration of architecture with the rocky peak suggest that the builders of Château de Quéribus possessed remarkable engineering knowledge. More than a medieval fortress, Quéribus stands as a testament to the craftsmanship of the masons who shaped each block by hand high above the valleys of southern France. Their work transformed a jagged mountain peak into one of Europe's most striking fortresses, one that still leaves historians questioning the exact techniques and tools that made such precision possible. In your opinion, how were medieval builders able to cut and fit stone blocks with such remarkable precision on a steep mountain peak? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Perched dramatically within the mouth of a towering limestone cliff in southwestern Slovenia, Predjama Castle stands as one of the most unusual and enigmatic fortresses ever constructed in Europe. Unlike traditional castles built upon open hills or plains, Predjama appears almost fused with the mountain itself, as if the structure had grown naturally out of the rock rather than being built by human hands. The fortress is embedded directly into the entrance of a massive cave system rising more than 100 meters above the surrounding valley, creating a rare architectural hybrid in which natural geology and human engineering merge seamlessly. For centuries, the castle has fascinated historians, archaeologists, and engineers alike, and not only because of its dramatic appearance, but also because of the sophisticated construction methods required to build and maintain such a structure in an environment that would seem almost impossible for medieval builders to work within. Even today, certain aspects of its construction raise questions about the technological capabilities and logistical ingenuity of the people who built it. The origins of Predjama Castle date back to at least the 13th century, when the first fortifications were constructed to control the strategic routes that passed through the region. Over time, the structure evolved into a complex defensive fortress integrated directly into the cliff face. Builders took advantage of the natural cave opening behind the castle, using it both as protection and as part of the interior structure. The cliff itself forms the rear wall of the fortress, meaning that the castle effectively has one side that is entirely natural rock. This unusual design provided immense defensive advantages. Any attacking force approaching the castle would have to climb steep terrain while being exposed to defenders positioned above. Meanwhile, the massive rock wall behind the structure shielded the fortress from attacks coming from the rear. Yet constructing a castle in such a location required far more than simply stacking stone walls against a cliff. The builders had to anchor foundations directly into uneven limestone surfaces, ensuring the walls remained stable despite the constant stresses of gravity, erosion, and shifting temperatures within the rock. But one of the most intriguing features of Predjama Castle is the vast cave network extending behind the structure. These caves stretch deep into the mountain and were historically used for multiple purposes, including storage, shelter, and secret passageways. Over centuries, sections of the cave were modified and expanded to create usable corridors and chambers, allowing the inhabitants of the castle to move through the mountain itself. Historical accounts describe how these hidden passages once served as secret supply routes during times of siege. The most famous story associated with the castle involves the rebellious knight Erasmus of Lueg, who in the 15th century reportedly resisted imperial forces from within the fortress for months. According to legend, while enemy troops surrounded the castle below, Erasmus continued to receive food and supplies through hidden routes that led through the cave system to the top of the mountain. From there, provisions could be lowered into the castle through concealed openings, allowing the defenders to survive far longer than their enemies expected. While the story has been retold in many variations, the existence of these hidden passages is confirmed by modern exploration of the cave network, revealing how intimately the castle's design depended on the geology of the mountain itself. Another remarkable aspect of Predjama Castle is its ability to sustain life within such an isolated and precarious environment. Water, for example, was a critical necessity for any fortress under siege. Builders appear to have taken advantage of natural water flow within the cave system, capturing runoff and underground seepage through stone channels and storage basins. By directing water through carefully carved passages in the rock, the inhabitants could collect enough fresh water to survive long periods of isolation. This suggests that the medieval engineers responsible for the castle had a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of local hydrology and the behavior of water within limestone formations. Yet among all the mysteries surrounding Predjama Castle, perhaps the most puzzling question concerns the logistics of its construction. Building a fortress inside a cliff face would have been challenging even with modern machinery. Yet medieval builders achieved this feat using only the tools and technologies available at the time. And the transportation of construction materials is particularly difficult to explain. The castle sits high above the valley floor, positioned against a nearly vertical rock wall. Large quantities of stone, timber, and other building materials would have been required to construct its walls, towers, and internal structures. How these materials were moved into place remains one of the most debated questions among historians and engineers studying the site. Several theories attempt to explain this logistical puzzle. One possibility is that the builders used an elaborate system of ropes, pulleys, and wooden lifting mechanisms to raise materials from the valley below. Medieval construction sites often relied on treadwheel cranes and manual hoisting systems. But lifting heavy stone blocks hundreds of feet up a cliff would have required extraordinary coordination and engineering skill. Another theory proposes that many materials were transported from the top of the mountain rather than from below. Since the cave system connects to openings higher up the slope, workers may have carried materials along mountain paths and then lowered them through shafts or passages leading into the construction area. A third hypothesis suggests that parts of the castle were built gradually from inside the cave outward, using the interior rock as a natural working platform while extending the structure toward the open cliff face. Each of these possibilities offers partial explanations, yet none fully account for the scale and precision of the completed structure. The problem becomes even more intriguing when considering the large structural beams and masonry components used throughout the castle. Timber beams had to be positioned within narrow spaces between the rock and the exterior walls, while stone blocks had to be precisely fitted to create stable surfaces against the uneven limestone backdrop. Accomplishing this work would have required not only physical strength, but also remarkable spatial planning. Builders needed to calculate how to distribute weight along the cliff face so that the structure would remain balanced and stable. Any major miscalculation could have resulted in catastrophic collapse, especially given the constant moisture and temperature fluctuations typical of cave environments. Despite these immense challenges, Predjama Castle has remained standing for centuries, surviving natural erosion, earthquakes, and the passage of time. The structure seen today largely dates from a reconstruction carried out in the 16th century after an explosion destroyed parts of the earlier fortress, yet the fundamental concept of integrating the castle into the cliff and cave remained unchanged. This continuity suggests that the original design was not merely a curiosity, but a carefully planned architectural solution adapted perfectly to its environment. Today, Predjama Castle continues to fascinate visitors and researchers as a remarkable example of how medieval builders integrated architecture with the natural landscape. Long before modern engineering tools existed, they managed to transform a complex cliffside cave environment into a functioning defensive fortress. Yet one mystery still remains: how enormous quantities of building materials were transported to such an inaccessible location. Whether through clever lifting systems, hidden mountain routes, or construction methods now lost to history, the builders achieved something extraordinary. Suspended between rock and sky, Predjama Castle stands as a lasting testament to human ingenuity and the enduring mysteries of the past. How do you think ancient builders managed to transport massive stones and construction materials up a nearly vertical cliff to build Predjama Castle? Share your thoughts or theories in the comments below. Rising high above a remote valley in the rugged Alborz Mountains of northern Iran, Alamut Castle stands as one of the most enigmatic mountain fortresses of the medieval world. Built in the 9th century and later transformed into the headquarters of the Nizari Ismaili state under the leadership of Hassan-i Sabbah in the year 1090, the fortress would become legendary across the Middle East and Europe alike. For nearly 2 centuries, Alamut functioned as the strategic center of a network of mountain strongholds scattered across Persia and Syria, allowing a relatively small community to exert influence far beyond the scale of their territory. Yet what makes Alamut truly extraordinary is not merely its history, but the astonishing engineering decisions behind its construction, particularly the location itself, at a position so extreme that even modern visitors struggle to understand how such a fortress could have been built there in the first place. The castle was constructed atop a narrow rocky ridge, rising dramatically above the surrounding landscape, perched roughly 2,000 meters above sea level and towering about 200 meters above the valley floor below. The mountain itself forms a steep, triangular mass of stone, surrounded on nearly all sides by sheer cliffs and sharp slopes that fall abruptly into the Alamut Valley. From a distance, the fortress appears almost fused with the rock, as if it had grown naturally out of the mountain, rather than being built by human hands. This location alone provided an extraordinary defensive advantage. Any approaching army would have been forced to navigate a narrow and winding path carved into the mountainside, a route that twists upward toward the fortress gate and leaves attackers completely exposed to defenders positioned above. In practical terms, the site transformed the entire mountain into a natural fortress wall. The decision to build a fortress in such a location was not accidental. According to historical accounts, the site was first chosen in the 9th century by a regional ruler named Wahsudan ibn Marzuban, who reportedly noticed an eagle landing on the high rock while hunting in the valley below. Recognizing the immense strategic potential of the site, he ordered a fortress to be constructed on that seemingly unreachable peak. The name Alamut is often interpreted as meaning something close to eagle's nest or eagle's teaching, a poetic reference to the bird that inspired the discovery of the location. Whether legend or truth, the story captures the essential reality of Alamut's design. The fortress was intentionally placed where nature itself provided nearly perfect defense. Yet the true mystery lies not in why the location was chosen, but in how construction was even possible. The rocky ridge on which Alamut stands is extremely narrow and steep, leaving very little flat ground for building. Transporting large quantities of stone, timber, and construction materials up the mountain would have required immense logistical planning. Medieval builders had no cranes, modern roads, or mechanized equipment, and yet they managed to erect fortified walls, towers, halls, storage chambers, and complex infrastructure atop this precarious peak. Archaeological remains show that the builders carefully adapted the fortress to the natural contours of the mountain, shaping walls along the angles of the rock itself so that the structure and the terrain became one unified defensive system. Rather than forcing the mountain to accommodate the architecture was designed to mirror the mountain's geometry. This approach created a fortress that was both structurally stable and extraordinarily difficult to attack. The steep cliffs surrounding the site meant that siege engines could not easily be positioned nearby. while the narrow access route ensured that only small numbers of attackers could approach at any given time. Uneven, powerful medieval empires found it difficult to challenge the fortress directly. Historical records indicate that Alamut resisted numerous threats over the centuries and developed a reputation as a nearly impregnable stronghold. In fact, the fortress survived repeated political upheavals and military campaigns until the Mongol invasion of Persia in the 13th century, when the castle finally fell after a prolonged campaign against the Ismaili network of fortresses. Beyond its strategic defenses, Alamut was also a remarkably sophisticated settlement for such an isolated location. The fortress complex contained multiple levels and sections, including residential quarters, administrative spaces, storage rooms, and defensive towers. Archaeological evidence suggests the presence of hidden tunnels, internal passages, and carefully designed storage chambers lined with limestone to preserve supplies during long sieges. These features reveal that the fortress was not simply a military outpost, but a fully functioning mountain citadel capable of sustaining a community for extended periods. Terraced agricultural fields in the surrounding valley helped supply food, while water storage systems ensured survival during blockades. Equally intriguing is the intellectual reputation of Alamut during its peak. Historical sources describe the fortress as housing an impressive library containing works on mathematics, philosophy, astronomy, theology, and alchemy. Scholars and thinkers reportedly gathered there for debate and study, transforming what might otherwise have been a purely military fortress into a center of intellectual activity. And some archaeological discoveries have even suggested that astronomical observations may have been conducted at the site, hinting that the castle's high elevation may have been used for scientific observation of the night sky. Yet despite centuries of research, many aspects of Alamut remain uncertain. Much of the original fortress was dismantled after the Mongol conquest in the year 1256, and its famous library was destroyed, leaving historians with limited physical evidence. What remains today are ruins clinging to the mountain ridge, fragments of walls and foundations that hint at the once formidable structure. Even so, the most enduring mystery of Alamut may still be its extraordinary location. The fortress appears almost impossibly positioned, and balanced on a narrow ridge high above the valley, like an eagle's nest carved from stone. Modern visitors who climb the winding path to the ruins often find themselves asking the same question that archaeologists continue to debate. How did medieval builders manage to transport materials, coordinate labor, and construct a complex fortified city on such an unforgiving mountain peak? In the end, Alamut Castle stands as both a monument of medieval engineering and a reminder of how human ingenuity can transform even the most inhospitable landscapes into centers of power. Suspended between mountain and sky, overlooking a vast valley that once echoed with the politics and intrigue of empires, the fortress remains one of history's most dramatic examples of architecture shaped by geography. Its story blends strategy, legend, and an engineering in equal measure. But above all, it highlights a single astonishing fact. Centuries ago, long before modern technology existed, builders managed to create a fortified stronghold in a place where construction itself seems almost impossible. Rising from the volcanic basalt cliffs of western India, the Ellora Kailasa Temple stands as one of the most astonishing achievements of ancient engineering ever attempted. Unlike most monumental structures in the ancient world, which were built by stacking stones block upon block, the Kailasa Temple was created in the exact opposite way. Instead of building upward, Ancient craftsmen carved the entire complex downward out of a single massive rock face, transforming an entire section of mountain into a fully formed temple complex. Located within the vast rock-cut cave system of Ellora in Maharashtra, this structure is widely considered the largest monolithic temple ever created. What makes it extraordinary is not only its scale, but the radical method by which it was constructed. The entire temple, including its towering central shrine, the surrounding courtyards, bridges, pillars, gateways, and sculptural walls, was carved from a single, continuous mass of stone. Archaeologists estimate that between 200,000 and 400,000 tons of basalt had to be removed in order to create the open courtyard and the elaborate architecture that now stands in its place. This means that ancient builders first had to cut away the mountain from the top, gradually excavating downward while preserving the structure that would become the temple itself. Such a process required precise planning from the very beginning, because once the rock was removed, there was no possibility of rebuilding or correcting mistakes. A single miscalculation could have destroyed the entire design. The engineering challenge behind this approach is difficult to overstate. In traditional architecture, builders can adjust or correct errors by adding or modifying materials as construction progresses. At Kailasa, however, the builders were working with subtraction rather than addition. Every column, staircase, statue, and corridor had to be envisioned before the first chisel struck the stone. The entire temple complex appears to have been planned as a complete architectural blueprint long before excavation began. From above, the layout reveals a remarkable sense of symmetry and proportion. The central shrine, dedicated to the god Shiva, stands aligned along a carefully planned axis with the entrance gate and surrounding courtyard. The proportions between the temple tower, the pillared halls, and the surrounding galleries suggest a sophisticated understanding of geometry and spatial organization. And yet the builders achieved all of this while carving downward through solid basalt, a volcanic rock known for its durability and hardness. Beyond the structural achievement itself, the temple is also covered in an immense array of sculptures and relief carvings depicting scenes from Hindu mythology. Monumental panels illustrate episodes from the epics Ramayana and Mahabharata, while colossal stone figures represent gods, guardians, and celestial beings. These carvings are not separate sculptures attached to walls. They are integral parts of the rock itself, carved directly from the same monolithic mass. In many areas, the carvings are deeply layered and almost three-dimensional, giving the impression that the stone has been transformed into living narrative scenes. The sheer volume of decorative detail suggests the work of generations of artisans, yet historical evidence indicates that much of the temple may have been completed within a surprisingly limited period during the reign of the Rashtrakuta dynasty in the 8th century. Despite extensive research, many aspects of Kailasa's construction remain mysterious. One of the most debated questions concerns the enormous quantity of stone that had to be removed in order to create the courtyard and temple structures. If hundreds of thousands of tons of rock were extracted from the mountain, where did all of that material go? Surprisingly, archaeologists have found relatively little evidence of large spoil heaps nearby, and some researchers propose that the stone may have been reused in other construction projects or gradually transported away over time, but definitive evidence remains elusive. This unresolved question adds another layer to the puzzle of how such a massive excavation project was organized and executed. However, perhaps the most intriguing mystery surrounding the Kailasa temple involves the tools that were used to carve it. Basalt is an extremely hard volcanic rock, far more difficult to shape than softer sedimentary stones commonly used in ancient architecture. Yet throughout the temple complex, the surfaces show remarkably consistent cutting patterns, suggesting that the builders possessed effective techniques for shaping this material with surprising precision. Their archaeological evidence indicates that the artisans likely used iron chisels, hammers, and other relatively simple metal tools typical of early medieval India. At first glance, such tools seem insufficient for carving such vast volumes of basalt with the level of detail seen in the temple. The walls display long parallel tool marks that appear strikingly uniform, raising questions about how the craftsmen were able to maintain such consistency across large surfaces. In some areas, the cuts are so even that they almost resemble machine-made grooves, though they were clearly produced centuries before the invention of modern mechanical cutting equipment. This has led some researchers to speculate that the builders developed highly organized carving techniques that maximized efficiency and control. One theory suggests that teams of workers operated in carefully coordinated groups, each responsible for removing specific layers of rock in a systematic sequence. By working in stages, they could gradually shape the structure while maintaining alignment with the original design. Another possibility is that ancient builders used thermal techniques, heating the rock with fire and then rapidly cooling it with water, to weaken the basalt before chiseling it away. Such methods are known to have been used in some ancient quarrying operations. However, even these explanations do not fully account for the remarkable uniformity seen in certain carved surfaces, nor do they explain how delicate sculptural details were executed within such hard stone. The mystery becomes even deeper when considering the speed at which the temple may have been completed. Some inscriptions and historical interpretations suggest that the core structure of Kailasa might have been carved within a relatively short period, possibly within the reign of a single ruler. If that timeline is accurate, the builders would have had to remove enormous quantities of rock every day while simultaneously carving architectural elements and sculptures. The logistical coordination required for such an operation would have been immense, involving hundreds, perhaps thousands, of skilled laborers working in a tightly organized system. Yet written records describing the construction process are scarce, leaving historians to reconstruct the methods largely from physical evidence. Today, standing in the courtyard of Kailasa Temple, visitors witness a remarkable engineering achievement, rising directly from the surrounding cliff, as if the temple had been revealed by removing the mountain around it rather than built piece by piece. Every pillar, staircase, and carved deity remains part of the same original rock. This extraordinary structure continues to challenge modern understanding of ancient technological capabilities and the exact methods used to carve such a vast monument, especially with the simple tools believed to exist at the time, remain one of the most intriguing mysteries in ancient architecture. How do you think ancient builders were able to carve an entire massive temple out of extremely hard basalt, using what appear to be relatively simple tools? Share your thoughts in the comments below.